Here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Dr. Anderson,
Here.
Dr. Gantt,
Here.
Attorney Hull. She was with us, and Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thomas. So we do have a quorum. We will move forward with item number 2 on our agenda. The floor is open for a motion to amend or adopt the agenda.
I would like to move to amend the agenda. What I would,
We have a motion by Mr. Davis to amend the agenda for, and can you say specifically what that amendment would be in that motion, Mr. Davis?
what I would, and I'm not saying for us to discuss it tonight, but I would like to go ahead and amend tonight's agenda to put the proposed legislative agenda for 2021 that was discussed at the last Government Relations Committee meeting, and certain members of Dr. Thomas's staff weighed in on it, and so changes were made, and I would like to have that on the agenda as a non-consent item for next week's discussion.
Okay, so where are you proposing that is placed under? Let me take a look here.
I would make it 12.5, and then presumably people would want to pull it off for discussion if they haven't had a chance to read it.
Okay, and so there's a motion to amend the agenda to add our legislative agenda as item 12.5. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Dr. Maddox made a second. Any questions or discussions about that? I would just note that I would encourage us, I don't even know if it's possible because I've sort of lost track of some of the things that we're reading. If it's possible to discuss and ask as many questions tonight, I think that would be
Sure.
a more effective use of our time, so that when we get into the business meeting next week, we're not extending it with conversations that we could have had tonight.
And I'm totally fine with that. I just wanted to, I wanted to give people more of an option to read it if they needed to. So
Sure. Okay.
So we are going to discuss that tonight? Item by item, is that right?
Well, if it's approved, then yes, we would discuss it tonight. I do understand that. I don't know how much time everyone has had to look through it and write down their questions, but the more discussion that we can have tonight, I think the better. And in between this week and next week, if we can reach out to people from the Government Relations Committee, if we have specific questions or more points or things that we want to share, I think that would be appropriate. So that when we get to next week, we're not having old conversations.
Okay,
And
thank you.
any other questions? All right, so we have a motion that's been made, a second for an amendment of the agenda. Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for that motion.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
yes.
Ms. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Dr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Gantt,
Yes.
Attorney Hull,
Yes.
and Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Okay, so that motion passes. The floor is back open for any additional amendments or an adoption of the agenda as amended.
I move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Right.
Second.
Okay, so we have, I'm sorry, we have Ms. Davis, was that you that made the motion?
Yes.
And,
Nicole.
okay, Ms. Hall for the second. Okay, any questions or further discussion? And just a point of clarification, Dr. Yeager, the policies from tonight or this evening, can you remind me where they're gonna, what the plans were for them?
So Angela just moved them straight over.
Okay,
We don't need to add them later. So, and I will send my notes because I know people didn't really get a chance to see them. I'll send my notes in email to everyone.
okay, all right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, any questions regarding adopting the agenda as amended? Okay, Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for us.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher.
Yeah.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Dr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Gantt,
Yes.
Ms. Hull.
Yes.
All right, there you are, and Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have our agenda, that motion passed. We have our agenda before us. We'll move forward with item 3. These are our informational items. So item 3.1, our Athens Community Career Academy report. Just want to check in to be sure there were no additional questions or information regarding the minutes that were shared with us. Okay.
No questions. Very informative minutes, though. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And we will move forward then if there are no questions, and trying to be sure I check all of my screens. Okay. We'll move forward with item 3.2. This is our SPLOS monthly report. Any questions or comments, discussion regarding what was shared with us? Okay. All right. We'll move forward to item 3.3. It's our Early Head Start Policy Council meeting minutes and reports. Any questions or further discussion? Okay. Double check here to be sure. All right.
Again, I want to thank for the last 2 reports. They were very well written. And I didn't really see anything to ask a question about. So thank you very much for the thoroughness that's expressed in those reports. I know it's a lot of work to get them done, but thank you.
All right, we'll move forward to item 4. And these are our board/community reports. And we'll start with the Athens Area Community Foundation.
I'm sorry, I totally slipped. We met on January 26th. There was a lot of information, but I really need to draft a report for it instead of posting it because it's a lot. And so I do apologize. I'll have it up, and our next meeting is in April. I will make sure that you all get a detailed report.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Maddox. And if you happen to get it before then, feel free to send it out, to the full board.
I'll do that.
Yep, and then we can just, just attach it for the record at the next meeting. All right, okay. What about our Community Oversight Committee SPLOS report?
So our last meeting was February 9th, which was before our last board meeting, after our last work session, but before our last board meeting. Did I make a report to the full board meeting at that point, or do you need me to reiterate the minutes from the 9th? I can't remember.
Can't either.
Okay.
But I mean, if you want to just simply recap that, those minutes, Dr. Yeager, I don't know if you have them before you since you had already made them, and that's okay as well.
So we talked about things like the public safety radio work is complete. The athletic fields are really close. The Cedar will be done March 1st, I think, and then they're going to go to Clark around March 1st, and weather depending, and then they're going to move to Clark Central, and they're aiming for an April 1st meet, I believe. The board headquarters, I understand the architecture drawings are nearly complete, or at least they were a month ago. I guess they're probably complete now. And that there's a construction management group working. The Piedmont move-in or taking possession is April 1st, I believe, and I think we'll be discussing that later this evening. There was some discussion about ventilation and ionization units. I would rather discuss the state of that affairs rather than have me try to summarize. We talked about the Clark Middle site survey, and it was recommended that we hire an archaeologist to assess the site and make sure that there's no historical issues with the site before we finish the design. I think that was recommended by one of the community members. Let's see. Sorry, I'm not that organized. We talked about the West Broad campus, soon to be scheduling the in-person meeting, school, and I think we talked about no, it was before the article came out. Focused on early learning is what we were talking about. School C, we still have the placeholder. We talk about it every month. Elementary numbers are down. So if we did build School C, we would have to pull students from other schools to fill it, and that seemed odd, and we would fall down below the 450 in the other schools. So I think we're still justifying not building School C right now. The 5-year plan is in progress, and starting to plan for SPLOST 6. And I think that's all I really have, except that they're still looking for new members. So if anybody has any members of the community that might be interested in this committee, they would love to meet them. Oh, and the taxes are up. The taxes are still going up. The tax receipts are still high, coming in higher than last year, I think. Okay, I'm done with my report. Any questions?
Okay, any questions for Dr. Yeager?
Mr. Gilbert, did I mangle anything? He's got thumbs up. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Gantt.
I think I do have a question, but I probably need to circle back to you, like come back. And it's about the elementary school seed. I think I heard you say that was just the general conversation right now as far as that is concerned. But I know that has come up several times with the board. And so
I believe the issue is that School C was written into one of the SPLOSTs, and so we are required to build it unless we get a waiver. There's no timeline, I don't think, on that building. And so the can keeps getting kicked down the road because it's not needed at this time. It was thought to be needed back when it was voted on. So I don't know if that answers your question or.
Well, it does. I just need to formulate it because I don't want to be, I think it's a question and a concern when I hear that we're getting ready to prepare for SPLOST 6 and we still have a project in, a previous SPLOST that we have not done. It would seem like that there's some work left for the board. I mean, I do get the citizens, the CLC, but some of this work, I would think that the board needs to decide what we're going to do before we start asking taxpayers for additional funds And so I just want to be sure that that is on our radar. I know we can't solve it tonight, but every time we mention that, it sort of, it pops up as something that's unresolved right now.
So I'm sorry, I was thinking that would be out of our facilities report in terms of where we are with that need. So I'm hoping that we'll have a more comprehensive facilities report soon to address that so that the board can act on it.
Mr. Gilbert, did you want to comment? Or, sorry, Mr. Davis, I didn't.
Yes, I just wanted to say that to me, there's also a larger discussion in terms of, what are community schools? Is that an objective of ours? So anyway, I think it's a much larger discussion than simply student population.
I agree.
I would agree.
Mr. Gilbert, you unmuted, I noticed. Did you want to say something?
Well, like I said, I think it's going to be a larger discussion. We probably need to approach this when we're doing the SPLOST 6 planning, just to look at all the numbers in the schools. And because again, if you actually you have school C, but you also have Eastham Elementary, so you have two schools that were on SPLOST 4. Right. So if you build both of those schools and you have to pull students and rezone from around there, you'll drop the populations of all the other schools below 450, and you won't get any QBE funding. So again, I think we've got to look at all that together, and it's going to be a lot more involved than us trying to talk about it here tonight.
And so would this work actually happen in the property, well, obviously with administration, but would we wait for the census information to help us with this whole concept of where we might have to move children to or from? Would the redistricting have anything to do or impact on us at all?
As far as?
I didn't understand.
Where we would direct children when we
Yes, I mean, we constantly monitor, the enrollment and where everybody lives and attendance zones and all that kind of stuff. We compare building permits, single family permits, multifamily permits that, where we expect to get growth and things like that. And that'll all be part of the SPLOST 6 presentation that we'll do to the board. So we'll have a meeting just for that, and that'll be a large component of that discussion.
So it'll be out of that we will determine a need for SPLOST 6 and then go to the voters. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to understand the sequence.
And I do want to say something that John just said, respond to it, because we've, and I'm not to get into it now, but that, there was an understanding, at least at one point a few years ago, that the early learning, Maxim Eastham Early Learning Center on the east side would address the specifications of SPLOST 4. So that's my understanding.
We did have that conversation, Mr. Gilbert. I'll allow you to speak, but there was conversation regarding that and the need for having an early learning facility on the east side of town, and that building being an available consideration.
Yeah, I would want to defer to MrPruitt because I believe the language in SPLOST 4 was very specific about the description of Eastham. So, but that's something we need to clarify and confirm.
Yeah, the language is including a new elementary school on the east side of Athens, Clark County, to be known as Maxine P. Eastham Elementary School, and a new elementary school on the west side of Athens, Clark County, to be located on West Vincent Drive.
Wow. So it does sound like at some point a larger conversation is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I guess there's a timeline here since when do we have to introduce the SPLOST 6?
I've talked to Zanona today. We'll be looking end of April to meet with the board. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have to do anything until July. and notifying Athens, Clark County. And then we have a period where we have to advertise, which I think starts in September or October.
Yeah, I think we're looking to do it to have a November election. And since this is an odd year, the timelines are actually a little shorter. So, which means we have longer. We actually have until, yeah, probably mid-September when we have to have everything together and start our advertising.
Okay.
And so we would need to be meeting soon to talk about this, since it sounds like it's a process and it's going to require, sounds like some significant decisions to be made as it relates to moving forward with one or not, or what our options are. If you are talking about this year in November, right? That a vote.
Right.
Isn't the 5-year plan though part of that process? And that's just getting started, right, Mr. Gilbert? Are you?
The 5-year plan, Zernona and I certified it today. So it's been submitted to Georgia DOE for them to approve. We have to get it, once DOE approves it, then we have to have it reviewed by our peers, and then it goes to the board for approval. So that's probably a month away. But we're doing the SPOS 6 planning now, and we'll have a board meeting in April, end of April, to try to meet separately just to discuss that. I'm getting information from the schools that I should have the end of this month, which allows me to pull everything together.
And I may have been misleading about saying September, because I mean, typically you pretty much have everything together in time to have, you know, 2 or 3 presentations to the public and that sort of thing over the summer leading up to it. Is that right, John?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments, discussion?
Could I go back just a little bit and ask which SPLOST was Eastham Elementary for the east side on SPLOST 4? So that would have been 2018? Wait.
That was the 2011, I think.
2011.
2012.
Okay.
They're not every year, they're every
5 years.
5 years.
Every 5 years?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was the November 2011 election.
Okay.
So if we build those schools, we use fund balance or bus district budget. We can't use SPLOST 6 to pay for SPLOST 4.
Basically, that's right. John and Byron and I have already been having some conversations with our bond counsel to see how we can best stretch those dollars. So I guess I just say we're working on it right now.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions.
I guess I would just say that Clark Middle, I think, is the top priority because we've already set aside money from SPLOST 5 to go towards the rebuild of Clark Middle, and we need more money from SPLOST 6 to finish that job, unless we just do a low-end renovation with the $10,000 or $10,000. That's not right. 10 million. 10 million. Thank you, John. 10 million that we have. That won't pay for a new school, but that might pay for some revisions. So that's the argument for SPLOST 6 is that we need it for Clark Middle. At least one of the arguments. The money for West Broad is already set aside as well. That doesn't affect Broad money.
Okay. Right, so we'll move forward with our to item 4.3, Envision Athens.
Envision Athens is doing quite well right now. We are looking structurally at how the project is organized. And so there will be a vote coming up with the Implementation Oversight Committee in the middle of this month. And so after that, we will know our path forward. And so the question is, does it remain as it is now as a volunteer organization or an organization, but without any type of, I guess, fiscal reporting responsibilities? if you will. We have in-kind services being provided by participating organizations. And so the question is, does it become its own organization, its own 501c3? And that's something that the committee will be looking at this month. Otherwise, we have an awesome campaign going for Good Neighbor Awards. Everybody's invited to participate. So if you have someone that you want to recognize who has been a good neighbor and models the values for Envision Athens, then that application is on the website. And I do encourage us to all look at that and see if we can't take this moment in as we're coming out of our COVID experience to recognize some people that have done some really great things in our community. So I would highly recommend that. That was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that report. Are there any questions about the Envision Athens update? Any further discussion? Okay. We'll move forward with the Georgia School Boards Association update. I don't think I have any, but I'm gonna ask for Mr. Davis's help because I do know we'll talk about the legislative agenda a little bit later, which eventually will have mean that there are implications for the Georgia School Boards Association later when we vote on that. But Mr. Davis, can you think of?
Yeah, there are two things. One is, GSBA has done a very good job in keeping us on track in terms of the legislative acts. And yesterday, SB 47 passed, unfortunately, which expands the special needs scholarship grant to include 504s. And one thing I do encourage board members to do, and I know that people have a lot of stuff on their plate, but when GSBA does send out a message and saying contact your legislators, it's important that as many of us do that as possible. And this is a fairly serious expansion of public money for private education, and so anyway, so that's one thing I wanted to bring to people's attention. The second thing is that on April 15th, our suggestions for the GSBA statewide legislative agenda is there are due. So if we have any contributions if we go on the GSBA website and we look at the current legislative agenda, the priorities of the Georgia School Board Association, and if we look at them and say, hey, there's something missing there, there's something that either it's worded poorly, or it's not there at all, or something needs to be added, please be in touch with me, and I can kind of walk you through how those, how we can make a proposal for that, because it has to come from the board. And so our opportunity to do that would be our meeting next month, right before it's actually due. But anyway, if we vote on it early, like next week, that'd be great, So anyway, I just want to bring that to people's attention if they see any additions to the legislative agenda set forth by the Georgia School Board Association.
And they should just let you know, Mr. Davis, and you can help us
Sure.
Figure out how we can.
Sure.
Okay. I know it's sort of, I'm still learning the role, but I know it eventually culminates in a very fruitful discussion at the meeting that's later. And so it really does have an impact on the things that GSBA will advocate for. So. Questions? Further discussion? Okay. we will move forward with to item 5, which is the board president's report. I just wanted to say thank you for your flexibility. I think it was last week. We did not meet for professional development, but I think I spoke with just about all veteran board members who were open to having our newer board members reach out. And so I do want to thank you for that. I'm hoping that we'll have some resolve with our schedule. Things keep changing, particularly, and now we have additional information to consider with the Cognier report. I have spoken with a few of you individually just to try to give some context as why things sort of keep shifting. But I will update you regarding our next training for this month. I think that is it. But Dr. Maddox and Dr. Thomas, can you remind me if that's it? Because I can't remember if it was one more thing that I needed to mention.
Were you going to speak to the Cognier report?
Yes. And I couldn't remember if we were doing that during mine or yours. I did see Mr. Barlament's thing. So I guess it would be a good transition. So yeah, we can talk about it here. And then if there are like, additional questions and things like that. I did see what Mr. Barlament put together. I think that was sent to the entire board, right, Dr. Thomas?
I hear you. I think just to you to share with the board tonight. But but I can, it was just for you to have for talking points.
Okay.
But I can go ahead while you're speaking and share that with them right now.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. And it's just really a snapshot. I think I had it pulled up here. It's really a snapshot of the areas that we've improved. If you've had a chance to read through the report, you'll see that we made some really good gains, and in particular categories. So like, remember in standard, I don't know if you've shared it yet, but I'll just sort of hit a couple of points. With standard 2.1 and 2.11, remember those were more operational and related to district work. So there were recommendations, but they weren't directives, and they didn't fall directly under our purview. The standards that fell under our responsibility were standards 1.4, 1.5, excuse me, and 1.7. And so that standard 1.4 had to do with our adherence of policies. And if you remember, we were under an initiating rating. And so that was the yellow rating that we see in the report. But under our last review, we were moved to the improving rating. And so there was significant improvement there. And we have a couple of areas that we saw a lot of improvement. That is in our policies. So I do want to thank Dr. Yeager, the policy committee, as well as the board. But these were sort of some of the areas that we made significant improvement. 75% of our policies had been reviewed, rescinded, or some type of action had been taken by November 2020. We also underwent policy training in 2020. We had our board self-assessment that was conducted, and we completed that and had action steps related to that. We will also have another self-assessment in keeping with those recommendations this summer or leading up to this summer. We also had or revisited those policies to establish our code of ethics, and just having some clarity around that as well, as far as like signing that, being sure that that's on our agenda each year. And then the area that we were most deficient in, which was rated as insufficient, was our standard 1.5, and that was adherence to the code of ethics. And so I like to look at these, like when you look at standard 1.4, it's a lot of like written, conceptual, and cognitive work. And then the adherence is more the behavior and our attitudes, like what we do. How do these things that we've written manifest themselves in our day-to-day roles as we serve in our day-to-day roles? And so if you notice with that was red, so that was insufficient. We did move, however, we moved to initiating. So there's a plus there, right? And then there's a growth. Plus is that we progress. And if we go back to those original conversations with Cognia, that was one of the things that they were going to be looking for, progress. And we still have work to do in this area. And so some of the other areas that we made significant improvement under standard 1.5 is that we did establish our norms. That was significant work because we did not have norms before. We underwent ethics training in 2020, and then the self-assessment actually helped identify the areas that we would need to continue to work on. The next step, so things for us to consider as we move, or not consider, to do and work on as we move forward, is moving that training, all of this conceptual work that we've done, continuing to move that into practice with confidence. And if you read through the Cognia report, there were we can see that theme there, that we have to continue to exhibit characteristics of highly effective boards, such as cohesiveness and meeting efficiency, and then that we have to continue to work on professional decorum in our individual actions and behaviors. And so there's still some work to do, sort of continuous improvement. But certainly some progress made. And then our last standard that we were assessed on would be that standard 1.7. And this area is, it was rated as initiating and it continued as initiating. And so that is something that we also want to be sure that we take a look at. There were some areas of improvement as examples of that, as you see in the I think you all have this now, but as you see here, those areas of improvement, the committee and governance training, that we regularly submit minutes to the board to be sure that all members are receiving all information. But our continued work is that we have to avoid establishing quorums at committee meetings. And so this definitely has some implications for our conversations about our committee work. Which we discussed at our retreat, and we need to continue talking if there are additional changes or not, but we need to keep this in mind, and that we need to continue that path forward with involving stakeholders in our decision making, as well as gathering that feedback from stakeholders as well. And we've started, and ideally, based on conversations with GSBA, we would have made some significant progress even by summer, I would say. But these were areas of continued improvement as well as areas of progress. Again, this is sort of like a nutshell. I would encourage you to read through the entire report. My suggestion would be that we continue having conversations, but that we also even discuss tonight if there are any things that stick out. We probably need to do a press release so that the public can has access to the most recent Cognia report. And I think that is it as far as the Cognia report is concerned. Dr. Maddox, Dr. Thomas.
I think you covered it. I want to thank Mr. James Barlament for pulling this together so nicely for us. I didn't get it to him until yesterday, and he had me a very nice, this is exactly what I had in mind that I thought would help Dr. Gantt to be able to present this. And then help you all as a board just to quickly be able to look and see as a quick reference. So he did an excellent job of compiling this for us. And I think, Dr. Gantt, you summarized nicely where we have been and where they now see us and what our next steps are.
I'll pause there. Thoughts, reflections based on what was just shared or the report itself?
I've only read the report once, and so I'll have to read it again, I'm sure, but I am so grateful for the support that you guys have shown us and for the leadership and getting us to this point. I really like this one slide visual that kind of summarizes where we are. It kind of makes it more digestible to quickly see and assess where we are. But I think I tell you, I feel better this time at this point this year than I did last year. So I feel like we are making some progress here. And I'm grateful for that.
I would just like to comment on the that we need to modify our actions and our behavior more than we need to now modify what's written down. And so how do we do that for each other? Do we kindly, gently remind each other when we behave badly, or how do we do that in a way that builds the team, because that's what we need to do, and supports the team, but also nudges, each of us when we don't do it right? How do we do that? Can we all agree on a signal or something? I don't know, something that helps us sort of nudge each other gently when we aren't meeting our aspirations.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's ongoing work. I do think, though, if we recall from that first cognitive report, I think this was one of the directives to have ongoing professional development and team building. I think a lot of this begins to seem more like normal and okay to, hold each other responsible, encourage each other, the more trust we build amongst each other. And I know that doesn't answer your question, Dr. Yeager, as far as what is a specific thing we do. And sometimes it's hard to know in the moment, but when it calls for some type of reflection on our parts to go back and look at our meetings, take in the report. One of the things during my second time reading it, I went through looking at, okay, where is there work for me here? Because I do know that there's still work for me, so I know not all of it happens in the moment. It's hard to really know because all of us onboarded during a time that there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of mistrust. And so it just takes it takes time and commitment to really get out of, to shape some of the habits. But I would say spending more time with each other, prioritizing our team building so that we can, build more trust. One of the insights from the first cognitive report was that mistrust and then the resulting relationships had pretty much overshadowed the work that we did as a board. And I do think that's true, but I also see a lot of progress from where we were at that point last year to being able to slowly turn and, focus more on like the work of the board. And so
I think if I could, Dr. Gantt, there's one, and you have pushed for this more than once, in fact, fairly consistently. But us individually talking, conversating over the phone, perhaps someday in person, going out for coffee and things like that. I know the COVID situation kind of knocked the wind out of all of us, but I know when I first got on the board, I was able to to have private conversations with each of the board of the members that were on the board at the time. And so I felt like I was able to just sit down one-to-one and say, you know, why are you here? You know, what are you trying to accomplish by being a board member? This is why I'm here. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. And just general background, just knowing, you know, what each other do. So anyway, I think we can still encourage that, but understanding that we are coming out of a period that we've been pretty physically isolated and certainly had enough Zoom meetings to last a lifetime.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Others? Right. Well, I would just encourage us to, you know, maybe sit with the report, go back through, read it, there, you know, look at those directives. The directives are not optional. They did reiterate that. So when they come back this year, they will be looking for significant progress. And so right now, the good thing is that we are accredited. We are still accredited under the same category, and continue doing the work that we've done. We've done an enormous amount of work in a short amount of time. And so we can really use, you know, that progress and momentum to continue moving forward. Are you all okay with a press release being sent out to notify the public of the status and the report?
I don't have
And
any.
I don't, I'm sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I was just saying I don't have any objections to that.
I don't want to be the only person talking, but let me bring our attention to the second bullet in the first one. In the second category, it says, but board must move training into practice with whatever. And then the next one the board must exhibit characteristics of highly effective boards. And so there's actually a program for that through GSBA. And I know that's been presented to us in the past, but I would ask that we consider as a next step, taking a look at what that highly effective board does and make sure that we focus on that. Because I think if we're moving in that direction to have ourselves become a highly effective board, there is some information that will help us get there. And I know that the new board members didn't have anything to do with getting us to where we are. And so I feel bad that we keep dragging you through this, but I would love for us to have a specific focus that we can follow, or plan that we can follow to move us beyond that particular section.
Mm-hmm. And that may be something that we can also include depending on if most people are okay with it, when we also do this second self-assessment, you know, because we do have action items associated with the first self-assessment that we need to go back and be periodically looking at, all of us, because if you look in that category as far as who's responsible in that report, the self-assessment report, a lot of those are, you know, the board and superintendent and things like that. So I guess I say that to say, Ms. Davis, is also maybe something we can incorporate in our next self-assessment. But in the meantime, I think someone has shared the criteria with us already. I can't remember if it was a board member or was it Ms. Palmer?
A few times with Sam. Yeah, Lisa. Ms. Palmer did. Thank you.
And so that may be, I'll make a note to just be sure that I go back and read it. And if there are any updates for next week, I will. But, you know, I think that is an appropriate goal for the board to be working towards, right? It moves us. Our goal has to be beyond just getting from under cognitive review, although I think that is a goal. But we also want to be sure that we are functioning at our maximum potential. And I think looking at what is outlined by that process could be could be a benefit for the board. So I would agree. But others, I'm one of 9, and so please share your thoughts. Okay. And so I think the press release will probably be sent to the board, or at the very least, myself and Dr. Maddox to look at that. But Ms. Gallagher, yes. Oh, Dr. Thomas.
Sorry, thank you. Dr. Porter has that ready, just because we knew we would have the conversation tonight, but I can ask him, he's on the meeting and listening, to send that to you and Dr. Maddox first, and then we can go ahead and get that released. We knew that you would be sharing it, and kind of exactly what Ms. Gallagher said. We would like for the message to come from us. We can't say before it comes in other sources, but at least closely aligned in time. So he can get that to you all while we're meeting. And if you can look at it right after the meeting, we'll go ahead and share tonight.
Okay, that would be good. Is that okay, Dr. Maddox and board colleagues?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, well, I think that's it regarding Cognia. I was supposed to be sharing something about our committees. I think what I was supposed to share about our committees is that we are still in the process of finishing policy. And so I know we had a tentative goal of March to assume our new committees and roles, but I don't think that will, at right now, we're not complete. And so we may have to look at, we will have to look at a later date to make those changes to our committees so that we can finish the policy work. And I wanted to check in with you all around that to be sure that you're okay with that, or if you're not, if there are, additional suggestions that you have.
I did email the draft revision to everyone right before the meeting, so you can take a look at that. I think the policy committee decided that it was a little too green and we needed some input from everyone before the policy committee revisited it. So we have our next policy committee meeting on the 12th, no, 18th, 18th of March. And so if you could take a look at it between now and the 18th, and give me your comments or feedbacks. All I did was sort of rearrange things. I don't think I deleted much of anything. I just kind of rearranged everything into the new committees we discussed at the retreat. So please look and comment and let us know.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yeager. Others?
I've got one question. When it says, this has of course been the issue that we've been addressing for a year, but it says board members not on the committee are welcome to observe. And I've been doing that. I was there at the policy committee meeting, but simply as anyone from the public would be. So presumably that's what we're talking about. I just want to make sure that
that's what we're being told by Cognia to do. I think MrPruitt has some opinions about whether we have to do it, but that's certainly what Cognia is requesting us to do, is to limit the active discussion to less than a quorum and try not to come to any big consensus, just make a recommendation to move things to the board.
Ms. Attorney Pruitt and I had some discussion, I think, and Dr. Yeager was in those discussions today. So not necessarily that the concerns are legal issues, and Attorney Pruitt, please correct me when I speak incorrectly, but that it's not so much a legal issue and a violation of the Open Meetings Act, but instead a concern of practice. And it's what Dr. Yeager just said, that we're doing consensus building with a quorum in many instances, more than a majority of the board there, and then coming back to the board with what is perceived to be a decision already having been made. And so even though they reference the code, in the many conversations that Dr. Gantt and I have had with them, the issue does not seem to be around violation of the open meetings law, but instead the intent of committees being to look at committee work, but not be a space where whole board action is taken.
So does that mean we don't go to committee meetings, or if we're not on the committee? I'm having trouble getting through this one, and yeah, so help me with that. So I stopped going to policy because it felt like to me that the challenge was that I was there, even though I didn't have a vote. It was inappropriate for me to be there, and that I was creating problems for creating a quorum. So again, even sitting to observe seems to be an issue. But then, of course, I was invited to speak, and so I spoke. And so I decided that the safe way for me not to be the person who puts us over that line is for me not to go to the meetings. I don't like that, but if that's how we operate, I'm fine. I can do that. Is that what we're saying? Is that we don't go to committee meetings so that we can potentially create that quorum?
Well, Dr. Gantt, you can speak, but I think we've had several conversations over the last year about this, and we keep kind of circling back around. Part of it then comes back to the question of, then do we have committees? I think that's what I've heard the board ask. So do we have committees, or then do we just have meetings that are board meetings around committee topics, and committee and board members decide if they want to come? I think I recall that in one of these. I mean, this literally has been kind of a 10 to 12 month discussion. And so one of the conversations was, so do we even have committees? I think, is that right, Dr. Gantt?
Yes, and I think it'll come, a good bit of this discussion may even come during our policy discussion. So with what Dr. Yeager, if we consider what Dr. Yeager has sent out, we also go back and reflect, take a look at, I think we recorded our meeting, our retreat, sort of what we, those discussions, and then consider both of those things in light of this Cognia report. I think there are a variety of different options, but it'll rest with the board, and that will need to be reflected in policy. So I think those options range from not having a committee, limiting, having smaller committees, having committees that are the same size, but limiting who, I think there are a variety of different ways, but the only thing I think we know is that what we've done based on Cognia gives some alarm. And then we also know across the state that there are a lot of boards without committees. And so what we do is up to the, I think a lot of that discussion really will continue as we, look at policy, and we take all of the things we've talked about and say, okay, this is where we go. This is what we're going to do.
I wish I felt clearer, but I don't. And so let me just say that, I know that what we really want to do is discharge our responsibilities as elected board members, right? In terms of the oversight of the governance of the district. And so if the committee structure is what we think was best for us to do that, I would love to see us make that work in such a way that we do avoid, I guess, whatever these accusations are, the things that have been observed in our behavior. And the only way I know for us to do that is to simply name those things that have been observed, and let's make sure we avoid those things. But I think also this gives us an opportunity to look at how we perform in our committees and what we do in our committees, because I honestly can't often get to the government relations committees, but those are some very powerful conversations that are being held, and they're being held with commissioners, they're being held with the mayor. And so if we can't all show up there and have those same relationship building opportunities, then that disadvantages some board members, but more than anything, it leaves us without a lot of information that's been shared. And so those are the kinds of issues I think I would like for us to address as we go forward with looking at our committee structure. And then I would also like for us to make sure that some things are just best done with the full board's consent, if you will, with the full board present, whether it's a joint meeting or something of that nature that allows us to have those relationship building opportunities and to share important information, then I think that would be great. So as we look at the committee structures, I would love for us to also look at our abilities to discharge our responsibilities as elected officials.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Davis, for sharing that. It sounds like when this comes before policy that that's where a good bit of the conversation will be, and then that will move up to our work session. And so
I can't go. I would put you at quorum if I show up at the policy committee meeting. So that's the issue.
Right. But you'll be at the work session, right? You'll be at the work session where the policy has moved up to be able to like express whatever any of us feel about what needs to happen.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And in the case of the policy for committees, I have sent you a draft 2 weeks before the policy committee will meet for your input before the policy committee meets. So please send me your input.
Is that the one that I got today?
Yes.
All right. I've not seen that before. Thank you. It may have been there.
Well, it was just created today. I'm sorry. It was just created today. You got it as soon as I had it.
That sounds better. Thank you. I got it.
And the other thing I'll point out, just to hopefully make you feel better, Linda, is that there are policies that the policy committee says this needs to be a discussion of the board. And the first policy on the list today is exactly that, the DJE policy, which the policy committee felt like it couldn't make a decision about the amount of money that we want to be advised about. So that is just simply moved as a review to the board for full discussion. And we fully expect a lot of interesting conversation about it. So, and we just did that again with another one. So yeah, I recognize, the full committee recognizes that some things need to be discussed by the full board. And we'll always have that opportunity in a work session. But I don't think you want to be with us when we're noodling about which words to use or which words to change on which policies.
I would like for that to be my choice. But so again, if we can't do that and adhere to the expectations of Cognia, then I'm good. I understand that. I would have to then volunteer to be on that committee and be able to be selected for that. But I'm perfectly fine as long as we can just get this to a point where I know when it's appropriate for me to be somewhere and when my presence creates an issue for either Cognia, Open Records, or the anything. I just want to be clear on what the protocol should be.
Yeah, well, the entire public is welcome to observe policy committee meetings. They're public and broadcast. So you're certainly welcome to, as I guess Mr. Davis did today, observe. You could even come to the meeting and observe. We just can't include you in the conversation, is what I understand.
Well, you can't include any board member in the conversation that's not on the committee. And so,
correct.
Yeah, and so let's make sure that we're being really clear that we can show up, but if we can show up by our very presence, because we're never not a board member, creates the same problem with Cognia, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like, I think we do need to, and it maybe doesn't need to be this minute, but I do think we need to be clear about whether or not board members can even come to the meetings, or as Ms. Davis said, that the very presence of another board member is almost like an implied quorum or implied, consensus. I think that our committees going forward are much smaller, so that may not be as big of an issue, and we could maybe even compromise and say, like, you can't come unless you're on the committee, except for, if there's a particular reason why somebody wants to come, or just so that it's not like a regular thing that other people show up, but there might be opportunities that people wanted to witness, and then just making sure that there weren't going to be too many people in the meeting. I don't know if that
And
would
that's
be-
where it makes no sense to me. I'm a voting member of the board and representing the public, and that's all of the public, not just my district. It feels awkward that there's a place that the general public can go that I can't.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
it's-
I mean, I'm just trying
Yeah,
to.
that's the piece that's kind of.
So
Well,
that's not
it's-
that's not true, Linda. You can come and watch the meeting like anybody else. There's no reason you can't watch the meeting like Greg did on YouTube, just not participate.
But will that still stand if she, when we return to face, for those meetings, what certain board or what board members then constitute a quorum just by virtue of being a board member?
Yeah, I think that's what we need to. I think that's what we need to clarify.
So maybe I think right now the next place to have this conversation would be in policy, simply because there's going to be a draft, right, coming forward for the policy committee. But Dr. Yeager is also going to send that draft, and I may be a little bit off on my timeline, but she'll send that draft. I think you've already asked, right, Dr. Yeager, or am I getting the policy? So ask for any feedback. So it'll go to policy. Policy will discuss. It will come to work session, and we can like talk our hearts out, you know, at that point, considering everything that we have before us, the cognitive report, you know, the decisions that what we discussed at our retreat, and just how we want to move forward. And that will be where that work is, in policy and at the work session, from my understanding.
I think that's what we do today. And the complaint has been that, you know, we went through all of this in the committee, and now we're rehashing that same thing in the work session. But I'm gonna stop objecting, because I think we won't go forward. I'll go forward with where we are. Thank you for sharing this document. I see it now in my email.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I just wanted to back up Linda's concern, because I'm thinking of the discussions that were coming out of the finance committee, and it sounds like, I mean, the finance committee does not vote, as far as I know, anything out. They simply go to listen to the budget and to ask questions. And now that we're using as being proposed that the budget committee will review the whole expenditures of the district month by month, and at the same time, it seems like most people are willing to keep it at the higher amount in terms of without a board discussion. I don't know where that leaves board members who are not on the finance committee. And I feel the same way Linda does about the government relations committee, because we really vote. What we do is we discuss, and I say the more the merrier. So anyway, I won't dwell on this either, but I do have the same concerns that Linda has.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis and Ms. Davis, for sharing. Are there any other thoughts?
I'll only go back to what you said at the beginning, is that another option is to just not have committees, and to have very specific committees for very specific purposes, but everything else is a general whole board type of thing. I don't know.
If I could add,
Go ahead.
If I could just add one thing real quick, Mike not only has MrPruitt has not only advised us as to the Open Meetings Act, Open Meetings Law. He's also given us his interpretation of what Cognia was even talking about in their initial report to us. So, now I know there's been a lot of discussion since Cognia came and gave their initial report, and other people have had a lot of discussions with Cognia. But you know, I wouldn't mind circling back around eventually to Mike's interpretation of what the Cognia report was even talking about. So anyway, that's just a
Well,
thought.
I mean, I never talked to any of them. None of them reached out to me. I was just trying to give it the benefit of the doubt of, surely they couldn't have thought that was an Open Meetings Act violation, but now we have the update, and I still don't know, as Dr. Thomas said, maybe they're just sort of being a little fast and loose with citing the law when what they really mean is they're talking about a governance practical issue. But yeah, I mean, there's no way that's an Open Meetings Act violation. I don't know what Cognia thinks.
Well, I think the issue is we continue to have the conversation, like, we have had it for this past year. And I think it would be one thing if that was a separate recommendation or finding, but I think when you consider it in context of the whole report, I think it is, at least my interpretation, that we're not effectively using the committee structures. If it, is not efficient. And so figuring out what we do about that to make it efficient, I think is where the board is our work. And that work happens in policy, because we currently do have a policy around our committees. And so if we want to change it, we will be changing it. That really is where that work is, to see how can we operate more efficiently with the committees we have, or not have committees. I mean, those are sort of two, options on a continuum. I would guess the other end of that continuum is to keep doing what we've done in the past, but I don't think that would be beneficial.
That will not bode us well. And we have heard it from Cognia, and we have actually heard something very similar, if I'm correct, from GSBA regarding the operations of our committees. And I have tremendous respect for Attorney Pruitt, and was why we engaged in dialogue with each other today. And I think he and I reached some common understanding around, again, legality versus practice. But I think the other reality we have to remember is that our accreditation comes from Cognia. And if it is a matter of us violating law, then we need to get Attorney Pruitt to help us with that, because that is a legal issue. But if their concern is more of how we interact, how we engage, and really the elephant in the room goes back to a trust issue. And that was referenced in documents. It has been referenced in conversations. Dr. Gantt and I have had upward of 10 plus conversations. Ms. Palmer has been in multiple of those conversations. We've written it, we've typed it, we've repeated it. That's their expectation. So I think we have to make a decision as a board whether we're going to stay yellow, because that's kind of where I feel like we are now. We can argue and debate it, but at the end of the day, the accreditation decision lies in the hands of Cognia. Now, if they are mistaken in accusing us of violating law, then that's where we have to engage Attorney Pruitt to say, Georgia law says X, Y, and Z, we're not in violation of the law. If it is an issue of us violating what they deem to be good practice, I don't know how we can debate with an organization their standards. Now, and we're paying them to hold us to those standards. I hate to remind us of that, but we received a bill. I don't know if you saw that today, Dr. Gantt, but every time they come, we have to pay them to assess our effectiveness in operations. So either we have to decide we want to do it or But we can't keep paying them to come tell us we're doing right or doing wrong and then say, but we don't like what they say, but we're paying them to tell us what their rules are. So at some point we have to decide how we want to move forward, because these costs are they're not free.
All right, so we will continue this conversation in policy. Dr. Yeager, if I'm correct, but just to clarify, this policy will probably be on that April agenda. No, March for the regular meeting. Or
So
was it
it's
April?
on, it will, we haven't put it on, we haven't formed the agenda for the March 18th policy committee meeting, but if it makes it through policy committee on the 18th, it'll be at the April board meeting.
Okay, at that work session. Well, that is all. I do want to end on a positive note. I really do think we have made a lot of progress. And I know that, it's easy to look at that report and, get discouraged, or at least I did after I read through it. I think I may have called the board member and say, hey, I need to process this, but I don't want us to miss the work we've done. Yes, there is work before us. Yes, there are some decisions that have to be made. There are still some changes, but that I think that is with any organization and any governing body. I think it's ideal to always look at continuous improvement. And while we would want to do that on our own terms, I think it's just an opportunity to continue to improve. And so I do want to thank you, each one of you, for your contributions that you made over this past year, because it has not been easy. There have been a lot of hours, a lot of energy, a lot of time put into the progress that we have. And so I do want to say thank you for that. All right, we'll move forward with item number 6, and those are the superintendent's remarks. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you. And I'll try to start on a positive note. I'm laughing at Mr. Davis laughing at me, but so I do thank you all. We really have made tremendous progress, and I just don't want us to get hung up on we're so close to the finish line, and I just want us to be able to focus on students and student achievement. I feel we have been so distracted between Cognia and COVID that we have lost sight. And if we go back, let's remove Cognia. If we go back and look at our board meetings for the last year, and we did an analysis on the time we have spent discussing things that will move the needle for children in Athens, Clarke County, things that will impact literacy and numeracy and life outcomes and college and or career readiness. I think all of us would be disappointed. And if we aren't, we should be, because our work as a school district and a school board is about changing outcomes for children. And there have been many distractions, some I think intentional, to take us away from the work of serving children. And so when I apologize when I become animated and emotional about let's just get it done. But I want to get it done because we have 17% of our Black and Brown children meeting standards in math. We have about 27% of our Black and Brown children reading on grade level. We cannot continue to sit and spend 3 and 4 hours of board meetings debating minute things that have no relevancy to us changing lives for children. And that is why I accepted this position. And I want to believe that is why each of you ran to be members of the board, because we want to change lives for children. And I just want us to get to a place where we're able to talk about growth, achievement, equity, disparity, discipline, when we can do the work. So when you see me get passionate, if you all just sat and looked at board meetings, and they're out there, they're on YouTube, trust me, Cognia has looked at all of them. Just take one day to go back and do a time analysis and see how much time did we spend just in one work session talking about student learning. And I mean, like literally, I'm in tears now because we have talked so much about air purifiers. We have talked about Cognia. We have talked about shots and vaccines, and all of that's important, but we never stop and talk about how our children cannot read, write, or do mathematics. And we are a school system. And so I just hope we'll all, when Dr. Yeager talked about a sign, we need a sign for that. When we go off and spend 97% of our time together talking about nothing that's changing lives of children, then we're not aligned to what our purpose should be as a school district or a school board. And I think when we get back to that purpose and we remind ourselves before we come to a meeting really what our purpose is, a lot of those other things will fix themselves. Sorry for my tangent, Dr. Gantt, but our kids can't read, y'all. They can't write. And they're not going to have opportunities if we don't start dealing with the real issues. So sorry, but there you go. My report, I don't even remember what I was going to report on. I want to talk about children learning. I want Mr. Gaskins to give you data. But tonight, I will welcome back Dr. Marsha Thomas. We were the dynamic duo at J.J. Harris. She has retired as principal of Coyle Middle School, has given herself tirelessly to helping children learn and grow. And she has agreed to come back and assist us in the role of operations, chief of operations, while Mr. Fisher is able to focus on his health and healing. But that is a critical part of our work as a district, especially in the midst of COVID and in the midst of preparing for a new school year. And so she has stepped out of the luxury of retirement briefly to help us with that work. So she is on with us tonight. I noticed Dr. Gantt said Dr. Thomas, and then she had to pause. So when we were at JJ and Dr. Gantt was there with us, we were M. Thomas and X. Thomas. So we apologize for any confusions during this time, but I welcome you back, Dr. Thomas. We're glad to have you, and we thank you for making this sacrifice on behalf of Clark County. Next week, we will resume in-person meetings for our board meetings. Those meetings are not open to the public, but we will receive emails for public comment as we have done over the last few months. But board members and cabinet members will be at the board office for those meetings. Lastly, is the one that takes time, but I hope that we have answered a lot of your questions tonight. Dr. Anderson, you shared questions, and I thank my team because they were amazing. Had about 1 hour to respond to 7 or so questions. You all jumped in, you got it done. I hope that it has provided clarity to some of the issues you've asked about. If not, as we get to those, we'll be happy to answer your questions. Brief reopening update. Everything has gone well so far this week. For those of naysayers who will say, no, they haven't, she doesn't know how bad they're going. If they are going horribly, I ask our administrators to reach out and let me know. But the input I have received suggests that the reopening has gone well. The buildings I have gone to has shown positivity. Our students were so excited to be back in the buildings. Mr. Gilbert is available now to discuss what we're doing in terms of air purification. He and I met today, and we think we essentially have 3 tiers of classrooms. I have gone in probably while my voice still isn't back. I don't know about you, Mr. Lawrence Harris, but we went through smoke tests. They set off smoke bombs. I've watched smoke go up into built-in ventilation systems. I've watched smoke go into standalone air purifiers. I've watched smoke get pushed back out of standalone purifiers because of the venting systems in the back. I've watched how air purifiers work in a very small area of a room, but not through the whole room. I've learned about decibels and how loud air purifiers can be. And if we have 3 or 4 in a room, the difficulty that it will cause for teachers to be able to teach over that. So just, I share all of that so that you know the excess, and not excessive, the extreme due diligence we're going through to ensure that our classrooms are safe for our students. But Mr. Gilbert can share with you a little more about kind of the 3 levels and what we're doing and decisions we've made about where to place standalone air purifiers. I don't know if Nurse Amy is on to give you a vaccine update. If not, I know Dr. Watley can provide you with that. And I think those are our primary areas right now that we are looking to get community and board updated on moving forward. So Nurse Amy, is Nurse Amy on, Dr. Watley?
No, she's not.
Okay, do you
I'm
want
here.
to give a vaccine update and then we can pass it on to Mr. Gilbert to discuss where we are with our HVAC?
Absolutely. We are in the throes of finishing up our organization for our first vaccination drive on March 10th. It will be from 1 to 6 p.m. at Clark Central and Cedar Shoals. We have quite a few, yes, Dr. Quite a few staff signed up, and we are ready to go to get everyone vaccinated. We've done a lot of efforts around educating people on the vaccine, as well as kind of quelling some people's fears around that. And that has yielded excellent results for us in CCSD. And so we're excited. March 10th is our day. We're ready.
Thank you. We're so excited. We've worked with different community entities to try to prepare for this. Nurse Amy Rourke, Meredith Paget has been wonderful working alongside her to get all of our people scheduled. We are also working to make sure our substitutes are scheduled, our ASP workers are scheduled, our lay coaches. So she is continuing, even though DPH was the first entity to receive the number of vaccines that we needed to move forward, we still have other groups that we need to get vaccinated. So she will continue to reach out to community organizations for that.
And I'd also like to just thank our partnership with UGA and the medical students who will be coming over, as well as our partnership with DPH. It has been phenomenal. They have been great thought partners in this process, and we are ready to go.
Got one quick question. Have our bus drivers and custodians been very receptive?
Absolutely.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Watley.
Yeah, absolutely. We were very much so intentional about working with those groups. And so Meredith Pageant has been very open to signing them up manually, because we do know that sometimes they don't check their emails, which is no fault, they're working. And so we are trying to make sure we're equitable in getting people access to the vaccine. And so it's been boots on the ground. And so we were very intentional with those groups. Yes.
Thank you for asking that, Mr. Davis. That was one of our conversations in one of our daily meetings, was making sure that we're reaching out to staff members who might not utilize email as frequently as others, and making sure we're doing things like posting paper notices and asking supervisors to reach out to their staff to ensure that they are not only aware of the service we're providing, but also that we're able to answer any questions or concerns that they might have about the vaccine. And not that we're requiring anyone to take the vaccine, but we want to be sure that we're giving the education that's needed so that all of our faculty and staff feel comfortable with what's being provided to them. Mr. Gilbert?
Yes. I'm next.
Yes, sir.
The crash course and HVAC, kind of an update. I attended the EPA webinar last week for indoor air quality, and they talked about ventilation upgrades and virus mitigation strategies that you can do. So some of the things that came out of that were increasing your outdoor air component in your classrooms. We are running our units 24 hours a day to maximize the amount of air changes that we're doing and also the amount of air filtration that we're doing in the spaces. Another thing was looking at trying to increase the filter efficiency on the units that we have. Their recommendation is to go from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13. We're going to do some tests. There's some challenges with that because you have the potential that the static pressure or the force at which you have to blow the air through the filter is too great, and it can either A, burn up the motor, or if you don't get sufficient airflow across the coil in the summertime or the warmer months, your AC unit will freeze up. So we're going to do some test samples to see if that's a possibility on what schools we can increase those filters. Now, I will point out that you increase your effectiveness, or it's going to capture 50% of the smaller particles. So it does not capture 100% of the particles. So just, you got to kind of look at, get your most bang for your buck on what you're going to do and what's actually going to work. We also looked at the portable air filtration units that you could put in the room that have HEPA filters. The challenge with those is A, the decibel level, because all of your readings, your CFM readings, are done at the higher fan speed, and typically that is over 70 decibels, and the teacher will have a hard time talking to her students and hearing them while she's also wearing a mask. So that's a challenge that we have. In a standard classroom, you would probably want to run a unit on half speed, and you would need 2 of the devices. And again, it's only going to capture about 25% of the air in the total room. So unless you're sitting by it or within a 10 by 10 area of the space of a 800 square foot room, it's not going to effectively filter the air for the remaining, 700 square feet of the room. So again, you're putting this in there and it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. Just in my opinion, and also in discussing with our mechanical engineer who designs our HVAC systems. Part of the challenge is that you've got 2 competing units in the space. So again, you're going to be pulling air through your return, which is designed for the central system to filter the entire room. And then you have a smaller unit that's just going to be getting a portion of it. One thing that we are doing, and we've done in our newer schools as part of the building process, we've installed the ionization units, which help scrub the air electronically as it goes through the filters and also the return air plenum, and that treats the entire air that's in the space. So I know that we've installed those in all the nursing stations and isolation rooms, and we have gone back through, and Mr. Bailey can maybe give me a number, but we've gone back through several schools and installing those on all the HVAC units that feed classrooms. Lastly, we've also been doing some indoor air quality testing. An easy way for us to check that is with the CO2 levels, carbon dioxide levels in the room. You get those when you have a bunch of people come in. That's part of when you breathe and expel air, you're expelling carbon dioxide. So again, if there's a standard that if you're 1,000 or 1,100 parts per million and lower, then you have sufficient outdoor air and good air in the space for what your unit's producing and how much outside air is coming in. So we've spot checked some schools, and we're continue as students come back to go around to those schools to check to see if we have any areas that are not performing for standards, and then we can look to see what we can do. The recommendation for the portable air units, we're going to look at the older facilities that have less than efficient HVAC systems to see if in fact that would help supplement what we're doing for treating the air in those spaces. But at the end of the day, you're not going to find a manufacturer or a person that's going to say that they can guarantee that if a student has the virus and is sitting across the room, that HEPA filter that you put on the other side of the room is going to disinfect all the air in that space and you don't have the potential to get sick. We won't get that guarantee. So I just want to throw that out. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. So as you can hear, we are doing multiple layers. So there are buildings that have sufficient, more than sufficient equipment already installed, but there are some places that we have identified that have older units. And in those units, that's kind of what we're calling those tier 3 spots. Then we will purchase standalones to support the ventilation that's already there. However, even in those spaces, the goal is to move forward with installing the more comprehensive systems that will give more coverage. And that was very obvious after we sat through multiple smoke bombs. You can see what's happening. And even in some areas, it was like the air gets confused because we already have a system designed to pull it out, like you all can see me in person. But then we have this standalone, and so it's going in multiple ways, which was actually spreading out the smoke versus funneling that to one particular area. So we have extensive work in progress as we speak to accommodate those buildings that do not have the coverage that's needed. And I do know that there is some data out there that speaks against ionization units. There's data out there that speaks against standalone units, and all of us being professionals know that there's research that you can find that supports anything, either way you go, but we are trying to go with what has come across with industry standard and is a standard that pretty much every school that I've spoken to and research that they're utilizing to have a greater area of air cleansing. We welcome any questions that you all might have. I know Mr. Gaskins also stands ready right now if there are questions regarding how we're going to address the academic instructional component of the pandemic and our students having been out of school.
Well, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for all of that information. And I felt like I needed to start because I'm the one who's been talking about it the most. And I also feel like I have also had the mini crash course in HVAC over the last couple of weeks. And I also sat in on that EPA webinar. And so I definitely have learned what I don't know that much now, but I definitely have learned what I didn't know before also when I was asking questions. And so I really just wanted to say that I appreciate the way that you explained it today and the things that you are doing, because there are a lot of people who don't really understand HVAC, and being able to have the language to talk about what it is that we're doing and the testing that we're doing, and that you're going to continue the CO2 level testing when students get in there and all of that, I think is really helpful in terms of knowing that this is something that it's going to be continually monitored. And if there are places that are already doing it fine, but now you're also finding there are places that maybe could be supplemented a little bit. And I think that that's great and really helpful to know. So I appreciate it. One final little thing that you maybe already have looked into, but I know one concern that people have is cafeterias. So because kids will not have masks on while they're eating. And also it's maybe less important about the decibel level in the cafeterias because nobody's teaching. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there, that maybe cafeterias might be places where.
Yeah, the cafeteria is actually a better place because it has such a large volume of air. The air gets diluted a lot quicker and a lot easier versus a smaller confined space. So you're better off being in a larger space with more volume because, again, it has certain levels of outdoor. It probably has a higher level of outdoor air that's being pumped in there than typically an office or another place would be. So again, I would equate, so if I'm going to treat 25% of a classroom, which is 1,000 square feet, and I'm going to a 6,000 or 5,000 square foot classroom, and I'm trying to put in a unit that does 250 CFM, the amount of air that I can actually treat is going to be a lot less and smaller in those. So again, the key is, check the CO2 levels, make sure that we're running those units, the EPA and everybody says 2 hours before and 2 hours after, let it run till it circulates. We're doing it 24 hours a day. So again, I think the key is just, kind of constant monitoring, make sure the units are performing as they are, upgrade our filters where we can, where we're not going to burn up the equipment. And then, again, look to see if we have any issues and we can go from there.
And I know you told us about this already in an email, but maybe it might be helpful for people listening why, because I know a lot of people talk about opening windows and saying like, oh, it'd be great if we could open windows, but in fact, that's not actually.
Well, what on our schools that have the outdoor air units, it in essence is opening a window. So you have a big unit sitting up on the roof that sucks in fresh air and it takes a fan and blows it into the classroom, which helps mix up and disperse, get your outside air in the space. Imagine at your house, you open a window, you're going to get some air blowing in, but when you put a fan on it and it's sucking air in, it does a lot better and it helps with your ventilation. That's what long term, all of our schools need to have those dedicated outside air units that distribute all the air into the classrooms. I would say most of ours do, but we have some of the older ones that don't. And I would look at, making that a special project to add those units if they're not scheduled for a SPLOS project. That would just be something that we provide, extra outside air to those classrooms versus trying to rely on just a vent that's open on the unit itself. So
that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deitman. I'm sorry, Mr. Davis. I was just going to thank Dr. Deitman. Like you, I have learned so much that I didn't know and didn't think I ever wanted to know. But I've learned a lot of acronyms and a lot about mechanical systems and operations. And you're right, by going in constantly. So we did learn when we were at one of the schools this week that, the units were being turned off. And so that was when Mr. Gilbert and Mr. Bailey said, okay, we won't do this 2 hours before, 2 hours after. Let's just keep them running 24 hours a day so that we don't have to worry about getting them on in time and leaving them on long enough, but we would just leave those units running. So it is things like that we are constantly learning. So you're right, this has been a very informative process for me as well. Mr. Davis, go ahead, sir.
Yes, now that we've talked about smoke bombs, I want if I had the opportunity to walk into our elementary schools this week, like I know you have and Mr. Gaskins, who was there? How is the teaching taking place? How are we blending the online with the classroom? So how are we doing our number one mission?
So this week, if we recall, our elementary teachers have already been back. So this wasn't new for them. So they jumped right back in. The students did. I was walking through, I looked in windows, I looked in classrooms, and they have, their petitions were up. The kids were coming in with their mask on. I think I saw maybe one family that, did not have a mask in the time that I was there. So the kids were coming in, but the teachers were ready for this and those dual roles, because they did this back in, when was that, October, November, before we had to go back out for the holidays. So it wasn't a challenge, I don't think, and I don't think it was for the kids either, because they were accustomed to this form of learning and this model and format. Now, we'll probably need to look at that a little differently in a week or so, when our high schools come back, because this will be new for them. But it went very well to me. Mr. Gaskins, did you hear anything differently?
No, I've heard the same thing that you heard, Dr. Thomas, and I would add, it's our K2 students, Mr. Davis, and then it's our K-12 adaptive population. And our adaptive population, of course, went back first. And with their success, we've moved them from 2 days per week to 4 days of instruction per week. So our K-12 adaptive and our K2 are in school 4 days per week.
So do we have two sets? Do we have like online, online instruction teachers? I don't know what the percentages of kids who have come back, kids that are still online, and how are teachers doing? Are they both talking to the screen and to students in their classroom at the time? What are the percentages and what are the numbers, and how is all that meshing together?
So, Mr. Davis, about 70% of our students have elected for face-to-face instruction. The majority of that is at elementary schools. So our elementary schools numbers are much larger than our middle schools and our high schools. And we can share that information with you in the board update because I don't know that information offhand. As far as teachers teaching simultaneously face-to-face and online, in some situations we have that, and some there's a dedicated teacher to the face-to-face kids and there's a dedicated teacher to the online kids. We've given schools autonomy around that. We've had some teachers that have formed relationships with their kids and they did not want to give up their class, so they have elected to teach both groups at the same time, so those kids would not have to have new teachers. In some situations, we have not. In some situations, there's just the face-to-face teacher, as I mentioned. In cases, the virtual teacher. In some cases, we have not been able to have a separate teacher, just depending on the amount of students at that grade level or that content area, like an accelerated class where there's just that one or two teachers that teach that course. So it just depends. It is dependent upon the school and the needs of the school. So we have a variety of a lot of different instructional models.
Thank you for that.
Dr. Thomas, can I, the explanation that you gave, I'm just wondering how can we, I know like people can come back and watch the meeting, but I was wondering, especially since there have been so many questions around like instruction, like what that looks like. And then as well as the like mitigation efforts. Does it already exist, or could there exist a graphic or something that is really simple for the public to understand? Or is there a frequently, I know we started with a frequently asked questions document maybe several months ago. And so are there, can this be updated so as a board member, we'll know where to like point people and we'll know how to explain it? The information that you're sharing with us, just trying to be sure that we're looking at ways to get people the information, but then also increase our efficiency, because I know that you and the cabinet, you don't have the time to like answer all of the questions that come in, and board members don't necessarily either. And sometimes we may not even know the answer.
Yes, we can easily do that. And I know Dr. Porter is listening. I'm not sure if Ms. Moore is on, but I know she started that original document. So we can work on something collectively when we have our COVID update meeting in the morning. We can talk, and I'll just go ahead and put out there now for the team just to be thinking tonight about areas that would be good for us to cover in a document like that. So then tomorrow when we come together, we can discuss that and get with Dr. Porter and Ms. Moore to go ahead and get something created. We can do that.
Thank you. And I wanted to just open that up to board members, because I know that's sort of one person's idea. I'm just trying to figure out like how we can be sure that the community has the information it needs and we don't find ourselves, having to go back and say, okay, go and watch this meeting, particularly if the meeting was long. But other board members, please weigh in.
I really like seeing something like this on our website. It's easy to get to, and I figured out how to get there fairly quickly. So yes, I think that would be very helpful.
We can do that. Glad to do it.
Okay, Dr. Thomas, does that?
Yes, ma'am. That concludes my report. Thank you all for your ongoing support. I thank our team, everyone that has been working diligently to make sure we're supporting our teachers and leaders so they can support our students in this return. So, and we appreciate the questions you all have asked because they have pushed us to really get out there and make sure that we are being very comprehensive in our efforts for mitigation.
Okay. Thank you for these updates, and thank you definitely to your team for working around the clock to, to get us where we need to be, as safe as we can be, given the times that we're in. If that concludes your report, we'll move forward to item number 7, and these are our presentations and discussions. And tonight we have a presentation on discipline. Dr. Thomas.
Yes, at this time, Dr. Watley is prepared to share information that had been requested as a follow-up to our report from Dr. Richard Welch. Dr. Watley.
Absolutely, I'm here. Can you all see that? I think the only people I see right now are Ms. Davis and Mr. Davis. So give me a thumbs up if you can see. Okay. All right. And walk with me along this journey. This is the piece on discipline are things that we are working on in CCSD. So I'm going to move forward. After the Welch report, there were a couple of recommendations that came out of that. One of the recommendations was for us to establish a discipline task force, which I think is very necessary and needed in CCSD as well as in most districts. And so these are the task force members who were selected from given names by their principals, by their leaders in their buildings. So I am on the committee, Dr. Richard Welch, the assistant professor, Sam Preston, our hearing officer, Krista Gillis, director of social work, Tessa Barberzon, director of counseling, Kathy Douglas, Hillsman Middle School principal, Tiffany Flander, assistant principal at Whit Davis, Dr. Amanda Gorham, principal at Classic City, Dr. Jennifer Scott, executive director of leadership development, David Brown, coordinator of behavior supports, Rebecca Sartor, coordinator of behavior supports, Dr. Melissa Perez-Rhyme, assistant principal at Cedar Shoals, and Reginald Thomas, assistant principal at Clark Central High School. There was a selection criteria for the folks that are joined this amazing task force. One, a demonstrated commitment to building relationship with staff, with students and communities. Number 2, an understanding of restorative practices, trauma-informed care, PBIS and SEL as it relates to dismantling the pipeline to prison. Number 3, a fundamental understanding of data and the ability to analyze data for trends and develop action steps. Number 4, an administrator who has experience managing the discipline process in their schools, i.e. discipline referrals, ISS, OSS, etc. These are our goals, and we're working through these goals. This is a work in progress. We are not sprinting. We are taking our time, being very calculated in what we do because we do want to see change. So here are some of the goals that we've kind of established based on that report, but also as a conversation with the task force. Explore alternative to out-of-school suspension. Considering the role of parents in the school discipline process. So looking at our policy and what does that, how are parents infused in that? We had a conversation a few weeks ago about the LDAJ policy and now includes parent notification. So making sure that while students are being interrogated and questioned, that we still notify their parents. Thirdly, considering a re-entry process into classrooms and schools after disciplinary consequences. We've already established what is called the case consultation process. Our school social workers hold that. So when students are returning from mental health facilities and returning from Department of Juvenile Justice, the school social worker leads that intake process back into restoring the community and restoring that student back into the community, if that makes sense. That will serve as almost like a framework for us piling on like a restorative process on top of that framework. Next, we have monitoring and evaluating the strategic direction of school discipline reforms. Next, we have focus on increasing community involvement. So, for example, LSGTs for schools with high suspension rates. The report says that they should devote significant attention and proportion of funds to school discipline reforms. And then lastly, revising the code of conduct and shifting away from exclusionary discipline, exclusionary discipline. Other goals will include investing in the improvement of ISS, funding additional personnel, teachers that are trained to do ISS, trained in de-escalation, trained in restorative practices, fund transformation of ISS classrooms to be more therapeutic. Next, invest in school discipline specific professional development of school leaders, funding and developing a school discipline specific PC induction for principals as well as assistant principals.
What is a PC induction, Dr. Watley?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Well, we're talking about professional learning. So creating like a professional learning community, and they're inducted into that process so that we're all speaking the same language, we're doing the same thing. It looks the same and it's systemic across the district. It's very standardized. It's not looking different. And therein lies some of the inequities if we're doing it different at different schools. So if everyone's trained the same, then hopefully we'll look the same in every school. I'm gonna stop and share another screen right here. Give me 1 second. Okay, Ms. Davis and Mr. Davis, can you see that? Because you all are the only two I can see. All right. That's all I can see. Dr. Welsh and I kind of talked about what does this framework look like. I am a person who believes in theoretical frameworks, and that moves the work. You have to have some sort of undergirth to build on top of, and he and I kind of collaborated on those and what that would look like. So the two interventions will focus heavily on policy, and then secondary will focus on programs. Policy, drives everything we do, and so we want to make sure that our policies are aligned to our programs and ultimately our outcomes for students. I know this looks a little kind of crazy because this is our thought web that we've been kind of developing, and hopefully as we build it out, it will, look more concrete, but please follow me. So for example, with policies, code of conduct changes, we're hoping that this will impact classroom management and also impact the educator's mindset, expectations, and also possibly their biases. Looking at the programs that we already have, and some that we're going to try to ramp up. One is positive behavior interventions and supports that will impact our school climate. And I'm just using that as an example. The second is restorative practices and restorative justices, but we've got to first start with restorative practices that will impact student relationship and teacher relationship, and even student to student relationships. And then next we have social emotional learning. What is that going to directly impact? Well, student misbehavior, and then also here we have student-teacher relationships. And then lastly, professional development for educators, culturally responsive and trauma-informed practices. We do know that, trauma-informed is just a great way to be, but after a year of COVID, adults as well as children, we need that trauma-informed practice to be embedded into the culture and climate of our district. So these are the mechanisms, as I said before, and directly pointed from those policy and programs to those mechanisms: student behavior, student-teacher relationships, classroom management, school climate, educator mindset, expectations and bias, instructional efficacy, educators' SEL and morale, and student-teacher relationships. Our desired outcomes is to reduce racial inequities in school discipline, decline in office discipline referrals, and a decline in in suspensions. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Again, I just reiterated that in the chart. We're focusing on 2 areas, policy and programs. And these are the areas, the interventions that we're putting in place, and some we already have, but some we are definitely going to be exploring, such as restorative practices, looking at implementing the train-the-trainer model within our school district. And then I've talked to you about the mechanisms that we've shown on the, that I've shown on the framework there. And again, these are our outcomes. So where are we now? I'm so grateful that I have a great discipline task force. I have a cross-sectional group of people that I think can help move this work in various areas. Right now, we want to get a pulse on where we are as a district. We are in the process of developing a survey to get good data on, the practices that folks like, things that need to be changed, just to see what administrators think, what do our staff and teachers think. Then also looking at our parents and having focus groups with them, and then a focus group with students. Student voice is very much important in this process. Our next step is to analyze our survey results, expand our ecosystem of support. And what does that mean? It means, how do we use student support services, the areas that fall within this division, to assist in this work? For example, our school social workers, our school psychologists, our school counselors, our behavior specialists, what is their role in this process? And those things are being defined, clearly defined. For example, for school social workers for next year, we are looking at tier 2 through our multi-tier systems of support, implementing a program called Check and Connect. Check and Connect is research-based, and it's been found to increase engagement with students in schools, particularly at-risk students, students who are at risk in the areas of attendance, behavior, and coursework. Our goal is to catch those students very early in the process, in the pre-referral process, before they get to special education referral. The next is implementing a restorative practice process throughout our district to have it systemic in our district. And then also taking a look at looking at universal screeners to embed within our MTSS framework, behavioral screeners, as well as a mental health screener. I am done. I will entertain any questions at this point.
Dr. Watley, can you just quickly go back one slide and say what the MTSS is?
Multi-tier systems of support. And within that systems of support is our response to intervention. And we know that that's very critical for us designing interventions at the tier 1 level for all students. And as we move up that tier, it becomes more intense and more specific to students' needs. That is very critical for our folks in special education, because in order to determine whether or not a student is eligible for services, it hinges on RTI. And so it's very important that we have a very strong multi-tier system of support and also a very strong response to intervention program.
And I would just add, if I could, that MTSS is for behavior as well as academics.
Okay. Questions?
And Dr. Watley and I worked together today, Mr. Harris and I worked together today, looking at our strategic priorities. I know that was feedback that we received from the board last month, I think. And it was great feedback. So we've gone back and revisited those goals and making sure that we are incorporating the discipline work that we have done with Dr. Welch, and then these outcomes that Dr. Watley just shared with you, so that we can ensure that we are reducing the exclusionary practices and that we're really looking at the disproportionality in how our in discipline outcomes. So we are making that an area of focus for our work as a district, and we will get that to you as soon as it's finished. We'll be doing, Dr. Watley will be doing some more work on that tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager, for Dr. Anderson. I'll have to get you an acronym list. We throw them around so loosely in education and we forget that everybody doesn't know them. But yes, you're accurate in the chat box. So Thank you. Yes.
Yes, Dr. Watley, what in terms of working with LSGT teams, you know, some of our LSGT teams have historically been very focused on discipline and trying to, you know, improve climate in that way. Other LSGT teams have been focused on other things. How does the process that you're working on in terms of trying to standardize, you know, the way that we in the prison, the school to prison pipeline, how do the LSGT teams kind of fit into that equation, or do they?
Well, you know, one thing is our LSU local school governance team. So one of their responsibilities is to look at the data. And so, and what trends do they see? One thing, I'm not sure if there would be opportunities for us to do training around particular, you know, data digs for particular schools, because certain interventions work best in certain schools, whereas others work best in others. And so what may work, you know, and that is where we would lean on that local school governance team to kind of be thought partners in that work. When I refer to restorative practices as meaning that we're going to standardize it. Right now we have about 2 schools that just have restorative practice, but wouldn't it be great if our entire district was a restorative practice district, right? We can actually say that we're taking an intentional effort to move this needle, not just in one cluster, not just in one school, but rather move it throughout the entire breadth and depth of our CCSD district. And so when I say standardized, it means that every school want to be certified PBIS, every school doing restorative practice, every school doing SEL. And it helps even with children going up the continuum from elementary, middle, and high. This is just how we live here, right? It's no different. In CCSD, this is what we do. This is embedded in our culture. This is embedded in our climate.
Thank you for that. That clarifies it.
You're welcome. Yes, Dr. Yeager.
I was just going to ask you about timing. Normally we approve the code of conduct in the May meeting, which means we need to bring it to the policy committee in April. Is that process on track, or what do you imagine is the timeline?
That's a high priority for me right now. My hope is that we get it by May. I will know better by next week. I'm not saying we're going to make sweeping changes in the student code of conduct right now. We do minimal changes to certain things. So for example, with the case consultation process, I want that to be embedded in the student code of conduct so that students know the process, families know the process, and administrators know it. So any changes that we've made from the time I've come to now, I would want to add those to the student code of conduct. So yes, we will be on time, Dr. Yeager. I'll make sure.
Well, I know we made some big revisions last year, according to the Welsh document. I know that those were pushed through pretty well. There were some major changes, I think, reorganizing completely. So I'll be curious to see the new ones. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Davis.
Mine was quick. Where do we know where we don't have PBIS already in our schools? Because I thought that was a policy that was implemented a couple of years ago.
Right, Mr. Gaskins, do you have that? Yeah.
Yes, we do have that information, Ms. Davis. We have 3 cohorts for PBIS schools. 1 cohort has already gone through the training and they are certified. The second cohort, they were supposed to go through the training this year, and that training was put on hold. And then we have a third cohort that is yet to be trained. So we communicated with principals last year that by 22-23, all schools would be PBIS certified, but the state has paused the training because of the pandemic, and they will resume it hopefully back next year. So next year, we'll just have more schools going through the PBIS training, and hopefully at the end of next year, all of our schools will be PBIS certified, trained and certified.
Thank you.
Yeah, the goals that you mentioned, Dr. Watley.
Yeah.
What are some of the timelines for those, or is that what the discipline task force will begin to tease out?
Absolutely. By next month, we should have some very hardcore dates and a timeline. The task force just met, 3 weeks ago, and we have another meeting on Monday where we're going to start putting some dates to certain things. So we will definitely have that in the next update.
And as it relates to the outcomes, and this may be still work of the committee, have there been identified outcomes with those goals? So for instance, when I didn't jot down the goals, but like if there is going to be a policy change or whatever it may be, or I think I saw somewhere where decreasing suspension for certain things, have data outcomes been linked to those particular goals?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's the goal, is to start with that theoretical framework I just showed you, and then kind of web link it to tangible goals. Absolutely, tangible goals. Yep, that's the next step.
And so it sounds like that will happen. And then I guess when there are policy implications, you'll let the board, that's when it'll circle back around.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anytime that we see that there's something, and that's kind of how I've been operating since I've been here, is when we see that there's some changes that need to be made to a policy, we want to get on that really quickly. And so as we're going through a process, yes, if we see that there needs to be a policy change, we'll raise that to the committee.
Thank you. And I have another question, but I think I'm gonna hold it. Like I may just sort of circle back around. I want to go back and take a look at the strategic goals. But yeah, thank you for this work. This is fascinating. I'm gonna vow to be very quiet during those policy meetings so that my takeover spirit will not have its way, because this is an area of passion for me. But thank you all for, definitely thank you for the work you're doing in this area.
Thank you.
We were prepared for your questions, Doctor. We didn't have answers, but we were prepared in terms of time. We know this is a passion for you and several others. And I think the only reason we have not heard from Attorney Hull is because she messaged that she was away from the phone for a minute.
Absolutely.
Are there additional questions for Dr. Thomas or Dr. Watley regarding the discipline presentation? Or thoughts or additional discussion?
I have some thoughts about it simply because Envision Athens is in the Safe Athens. They really are addressing some of these things in the larger community. And so if you guys are not connected with that particular subgroup in Envision Athens, and I would highly encourage that. Again, I think it's great to have these supports on the outside as well as inside. And I think they would really enjoy hearing, what you're doing in the schools more.
Absolutely. I've been attending the Envision Athens meeting. Yes.
Awesome. Yay. That makes me happy.
Yeah. I was talking to someone today. Yes, ma'am. I'm on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's going to eventually work. It's all going to converge, and then all of a sudden, bam, that problem's going to be solved. I'm excited.
Hey, well, thank you very much. I don't think I see any hands. So we'll move forward. Thank you for that update and that report and your efforts towards addressing discipline in our district. The next item is our financial report. That's item 8. 8.1 is January 2021, the general fund the general fund financial report. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman.
All right, yes, ma'am. Mr. Schooneman is prepared to share that report with you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Dr. Gantt and members of the board. These are the financial statements through January. So that's 7 months into the fiscal year. So we're kind of on the second I guess up until this point, we've had positive trends, and the governor and the passage of the 2021 amended budget. So we'll get there in just a moment. So starting off with our cash and fund balance, it's tracking well above where we were at in FY20. We ended the year at $4.5 million that we added to our fund balance and cash in FY20, and we've added about another $1.5 million through the first half of this fiscal year. So both our cash and fund balance, visually, you can see are tracking above where we were at in FY20, roughly $6 million at this point. Our revenues, we're going to split those up into two different categories, our local property taxes and then our state QBE. Our local property taxes, I highlighted that in red just because I want to keep an eye on it. It's tracking slightly behind where we were at this point last fiscal year. Although, just a reminder, I did talk to the tax commissioner and she's still confident that they're going to receive at least 98% of what they have budgeted for the fiscal year, which means 100% for us. So just want to keep an eye on it just because we are slightly behind where we were at this point last year. And that's why I highlighted it in red, just so we can keep our eye on it. Second half is the QBE, which is our state revenue. If you haven't heard by now, Governor Kemp, he signed the FY21 amended budget. So that takes what we're going to receive this fiscal year from the state and provides an update. You know, the revenues at the state level have been strong. And so they really wanted to show school districts the support that's necessary and needed. And so what it means to CCSD down here below, you can see we're slated to receive $3.6 million in excess of what we were originally slated to get. And as you can see that it's all in this austerity column right here. Mm-hmm. We were initially kind of on the hook, or the state was going to withhold $7.3 million from what we earned as a district. And they're releasing about $4.4 million of that austerity. So they're basically refunding or releasing 60% of what they were going to hold back. So that's huge for our district, and especially in a year when we were planning on dipping into our fund balance. Even though we've had some positive trends up until now, this is a huge, huge boost for us. And instead of dipping into our fund balance this year as a result of this additional revenue, we'll most certainly add funds again at the end of this fiscal year. So this aside, in terms of total revenues, because we haven't even received a dime of this additional revenue yet, we are already 73.3% of what we had budgeted compared to 71.3% at this time last fiscal year. So we're already slightly ahead of where we were. And we're going to receive an additional $3.6 million this second half of the fiscal year. So just visually looking at the statement of revenues, you can see that the bar graph year to date, we're at 73.3, slightly ahead of where we were at this point last fiscal year. You can see the revenues by source. The state is accounting for 24%, while local property taxes at 76%. And as the year progresses, this state portion will end up being about 40%, while the local will be 60%. Our expenditures, we are still on track to spend less than our FY21 budget. There's no significant concern that I can see. We're at 45.7% compared to 46.4% last year. Just due to the timing of COVID, when we went out, or not out, when we went all virtual last year in FY20, now we're going back face to face. I do anticipate some of our expenditures to start, the level of expenditures to increase again back to a semi-normal rate. And so I do anticipate the level of expenditures to surpass the FY20 rates going into the second half of the fiscal year. What we're really gonna focus in and hone in on now in the second portion of the year is the cash flow projection. And so if you take a look at what we had initially projected in our budget, this blue line, we were planning on our bank account or our fund balance decreased by 5.4 or roughly $5.5 million. I had shared with you in previous months that trend line, it was starting to look, it was looking better financially speaking. You know, we're collecting revenues pretty strong and spending less than we anticipated. And so the trend line was increasing. And then now that we've gotten that additional $3.6 million boost from the amended FY21 budget, we will almost certainly add, I would say, anywhere between $1.5 and $2 million to the budget again this fiscal year. And that is really important and sets us up strong to go into the next FY22 budget. So we're really going to take into consideration the fact that over the last 3 fiscal years, we've added quite a bit of funds to the fund balance, as well as what we're projecting this year. I think it's probably important to take a look at and consider when we're assessing the millage rate. I'd really like the board to consider using some of our fund balance instead of keeping the millage at 20, considering rolling back the millage rate and using some of our fund balance. And even if we use some of it, we will still be in a safe place, considering our 15% benchmark that we have. So that's a discussion that I'd like to have with you guys next month when our budget comes together a little bit more in clarity. We'll have numbers that are more solid. I'd like to present to you the option to use some of our fund balance in lieu of keeping the millage rate at 20 mils. Dr. Thomas, that is my financial report. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Sherman.
Dr. Thomas?
Yes, go ahead. Yes,
yeah, I've got a question. I just want to make sure that I do understand if the governor does what he says he's going to do, which is, you know, I mean, what's in the paper is that he's going to provide every K-12 teacher $1,000 bonus. Is he, now the last time teachers got, that came out in the paper, it was a $3,000 bonus, but it didn't cover all our teachers. And it also did not address, in terms of equity, it didn't address our other school personnel. So what is the $1,000 that is now being talked about by the governor? If he gets what he wants, what would that look like?
We received some word for the first time today. We received a fact sheet from GDOE, and the language that was in there, it was all teachers and school personnel. And the way that they're going to tell us exactly who earns it or not, it's all based off of the CPI reports that HR puts together and submits. And from what I can tell, the language on that fact sheet, by and large, it's going to be every full-time employee in the district. And so just with that little piece of knowledge, plus the fact that we're getting $3.6 million in excess of what we budgeted, we are emphasizing and are going to strongly recommend that every full-time person in our district, doesn't matter if they're a custodian, bus driver, teacher, we're going to push to receive that $1,000 supplement or bonus.
What's the CPI acronym?
Selena, can you help me out there?
Yes, it's Certified Personnel Inventory.
Thank you.
And I saw the celebration, Mr. Davis. I was excited when I read it today to see that it did include our classified staff. And then if we have any staff that are not covered due to us possibly well, we know we have staff we pay beyond what we're allocated. If for some reason any of those individuals are not covered, then we will assume the responsibility for that payment. But I was really excited to see that transportation, nutrition, custodians were included in that email.
Now, I think pre-K has been left out, right? Early learning, so that's where we may have to, or hasn't been. I see Serena shaking her head, so, okay, good.
No, sir, pre-K teachers were added in, and there's also some language around half-time employees that were maybe receiving half of it. I think there's still some details to be worked out on that, but that the FAQ sheet was, as Mr. Schieneman said, gave us a lot more information and clarity around how we're moving forward with that.
Well, I don't want to get too dramatic, but it takes my breath away. Thank you.
Super.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any additional questions? All right, so Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schieneman, does that conclude your report?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
All right. We'll move forward with our policies, regulations, and exhibits. The ones, we'll start with the ones to be posted for 4 weeks. We have items 9.1 through 9.25. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Yeager, and she will walk us through these or provide a summary, and we can ask questions and move forward accordingly. Dr. Yeager.
Thank you. Excuse me. So as promised, the first two on this list are the DJE purchasing policies, which are listed as review only, recommendation from the policy committee. But in fact, we knew that we needed to have a discussion of the full board. You might have gotten my quick question email, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so, when I queried everyone about how they're feeling about the $80,000 limit on superintendent spending without board approval. I forget what the official term of that number is, but it's the ceiling above which Dr. Thomas would, or any superintendent would need our permission to purchase something above that limit. In the past, there's been quite a bit of unhappiness about some things that were spent under that $80,000 limit. So there's two issues. One is, what do we want the limit to be? And then the second issue, which I think is already solved, is for the things that are below that limit, or let's see, there's a reporting piece of the puzzle, right? And I think the reporting
Dr. Yeager,
piece
you're
has,
coming in and out.
okay, I'm sorry, maybe
Maybe it's my internet, but you're bouncing. So, okay, go right ahead.
Yeah, I can hear her good. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, so if we open up this policy and you take a look at what it says, there's several mentions of this $80,000 limit. So I'm just throwing it out there. We can leave that $80,000 in place, or we can discuss reducing it, which I think some members of the board have mentioned they want to do. But before we jump into that discussion, Dr. Thomas, during the policy committee meeting where we discussed this policy, was going to think about it, and with hopefully not putting you totally on the spot, but if you have thought about it some more, Dr. Thomas, like what would you see as a reasonable number based on the kinds of things you spend money on?
So Mr. Schieneman and I had spoken about it, as well as I think Ms. Jackson weighed in. Is that right, Mr. Schieneman?
He just helped me pull together some research from surrounding districts, as well as other districts that are of similar size and nature of CCSD.
And did we kind of collectively talk about a 50,000 threshold just because some items can add up quickly? I know we also had discussion, Dr. Yeager, around consultants and those costs. I think Mrs. Davis, you were in that conversation as we discussed, should it be different for those? But Mr. Schoeneman, was 50 what seemed to be kind of reasonable?
50 seems reasonable. One thing I was going to say, we also had this discussion in the finance committee.
Right.
Help,
Yes.
if it would help ease the nerves of any board members that's a little bit weary of the $80,000. Right now, I produce a monthly report that has all of the paid invoices that we pay each month, from 1 penny all the way up past $80,000. And I guess looking at it and the function of that report, I think that report can be overwhelming as probably too much information. And instead, if it's any consolation, or if it might ease any of the board members' nerves that are uncomfortable with that 80,000, I can produce probably a 1-pager that is any invoices that we paid that are between 10,000 and 80,000. And instead of being, a 200-page report, it'll be in 1-page document where you can pick it up and say, okay, although we didn't approve these, I can see these really quickly and reference them, what those other invoices are that we didn't approve, but are between 10,000 and 80,000. So if that's helpful, that's something that I'm more than willing to do.
And what fraction of those do you think in general would fall between 50 and 80?
That would be challenging. I mean, it would be a very small percentage.
Yeah.
I would say if I had a report of only invoices paid between 50 and 80, it might be 2 or 3 lines, per month. It would be very small.
So do you think it would be onerous if those 50 to 80, 2 or 3 items had to be run by the board every month, or would that gum up the works?
I guess to answer your question knowledgeably, I'll be happy to do that research for you and just say between this range and this range, this is how many more you're looking at approving each month. I can definitely do that research and supply it to the board.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So we discussed this in our finance committee meeting, but again, from the experience of getting it moved up to the 80,000, it was mostly change orders from construction that caused this. And then it was also property, things that came out of property management and facilities management, where we had to do some emergency repairs on equipment that we were struggling often to call a board meeting to get that approval, because it was $10,000 back then to actually allow the board to vote to do that. And then it turned into a situation where several times we were doing forgiveness because of the urgency of the moment. The money had to be spent in order to handle the situation that needed to happen right then in the schools. And so that became, I remember at least 2 occasions when the superintendent had to come to us and say, well, I had to approve this, or we spent this and we didn't get your approval, but we didn't have time to convene you. And so if this concern is only about a former superintendent who had an expense that somebody wasn't aware of, I just would rather we not spend time changing a policy for a situation that doesn't exist. When we have a failure of a policy, because had we had these reports that Mr. Schoeneman has offered to send to us, or had we even been managing our strategic plan, then we would have had those reports coming from that superintendent and we wouldn't be having this discussion. So I think that we arrived at that $80,000 doing exactly what you're asking Mr. Schoeneman to do that was done in the past when we set it here. And so I just have a concern that we not spend time unnecessarily changing something that doesn't give us a return on that investment and does not do anything to help us with the issues that have been brought before us by Dr. Thomas. I think we have a remedy, and I would posit that we should go forward. And I shared that prior to the board meeting. You may not have had a chance to look at it in the policy that says, even though the expenditures under $80,000 do not require board approval, the superintendent is required to report those to us. And so we now have a mechanism in place to do that reporting. I would ask that we move forward and leave this policy alone.
I would like to respectfully disagree, and to some degree, let me put it that way. First off is that, and I was trying to find it again, and I've always had trouble finding it, but whenever I asked John Knox, he could find it, and that is either in the policy or in the reg where it says that the board would be would be notified.
It's in the policy that I mailed. Did you get it?
Okay. No, I have not. But anyway, so that was already there and it just wasn't implemented. So that is a problem. I mean, to have a policy and to not have it carried out can be a problem. I think that the issue that I personally had was on what is classified as professional services. And I've never seen an issue, and I may have voted to replace a roof, Linda, that sprung a leak or something, and I just don't remember. But I've always thought that the superintendent had full authority to do whatever needed to be done by way of maintenance on our facilities. And so
no, cap on the spending, $10,000. Everything had to come before us.
Okay, that's not what I've gained out of it, because we would have very few of those votes that I remember. But anyway, my focus is on the professional services, and I say that because I think that as a board member, it's my obligation to be able to, if someone questions me about an expenditure, to be able to explain it, if it's of a significant amount. And to me, a significant amount, and again, it depends, 10,000 it used to be. If people want to, if we want to see some place in the middle between 10,000 and 80,000, I'm amenable to that. But I just feel like that there were things that were being along the lines of professional services that I could not explain, and I felt like I had fallen down on the job. Now, I was not a member of the finance committee, so those who were, maybe they could explain those expenditures, but I couldn't. So I am strongly supporting a lesser amount than the 80,000. Unless, except, and again, I'm talking about professional services. I see a distinction between professional services and maintaining our building structures and our facilities.
So are there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I'm going to make a recommendation or a suggestion. Dr. Gantt?
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's see, because this is going to be out for public comment, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, maybe go ahead and push it out as is. I know, like, I certainly hear Mr. Davis's, his thoughts around that. I guess when I look at policy, I think about what problem are we trying to solve? And if the problem that we're trying to solve is professional services, decreasing the amount or even increasing the amount won't necessarily get to that problem. And so I think that is a piece of what we have to tease out. Are we trying to solve a transparency problem? Are we trying to, go back and, be sure that are we trying to solve a trust issue? And I want to be sure, my opinion is that, when we start using policy to do that, because this policy has been in place And so what that meant is that the responsibility was, is both on, of course, the superintendent as well as the board to use the means and the resources as at its disposal when a person is not following the particular policy. And so I still don't know if it gets at what the problem, what the core of the problem is. And so, and again, that's whether we move it up or down. If we're talking about professional services, then I think we have to peel that up and say, okay, well, what about professional services? When we peel that up and then, well, okay, well, what is it that we have a problem with professional services? Do we feel that there are certain professional services that shouldn't be used? Do we feel like there's a certain amount that should be spent on contractors? Do we feel that we have, problems with the RFPs and for goods and services? That is very different. And that's not gonna, I don't think that this policy will be able to, if those are really the underlying fears and concerns, I don't know that moving this up or down, honestly, will be able to get rid of those problems. I think those are more, direct conversations about what the board expects out of the person who is, in that role, and how that fits then with our vision. Because if we have no idea, then beyond this, Dr. Thomas and before Dr. Thomas, if we have no idea as far as like what standard or what is the expectation, then moving this up or down still doesn't communicate directly to that person what the expectation is.
I guess what it is transparency, and we attempted to with the last administrator to, have that adhered to, and the policy for me, the policy is back up. Otherwise I wouldn't have just brought the policy out in the blue. So for me, it is about transparency, which I like the idea that's been brought forth that it would be a separate spreadsheet so that it could be clearly identified, what is being spent, because that was a clear issue for me before. We can't ignore what happened. We can move forward, that's great, but what happened is what happened. And a lot of things got spent that we did not know about, a lot of huge purchases. And so my whole thing is it's not personal. It's, for me, it's fiscal responsibility, and we have been here before. And so now that we are at this policy again, I would just like to see that, just make sure that we are able to see clearly, like all this, like that huge spreadsheet is hard for me to deal with all that. I like to see it kind of, and I've asked this in the past when we talked about this the last time with the last administrator, but so for some reason we did not get there. So for me, it's more than a conversation sometimes, that we have to make these kind of decisions. So I hear you too, but for me, that's where I was coming from. But whatever the will of the board is, I'm good with it as long as we have that, it seems like we had that part of it down.
Yeah, and I think that's really where the work is with the, right while we have a finance committee. And I know we're looking at how those might fit together. But I do think it is, it does go back to like the will of the board. If I'm not mistaken, although I could be getting our documents confused, because you're right, it is a massive document, but I think I remember getting a line by line item. It's just that, it's like, what do you do with that info? Because it's a lot of information. And then at that point, I do think it goes back to the board to say, hey, and it might just not be me, the consensus of the board to say, hey, we need a little bit more. I guess what I'm saying is we're going to need, if the board wants something more simplified than what we are being provided with and what we've been provided with in the past, then it does go back to the board saying, hey, we need something that is lesser, and we may need that if this is decreased, or if it's increased, or if it stays the same. So I think part of this is our work, figuring out how do we request as a board, as a unit, what we need, understanding that we may sometimes need different things, but as a collective unit, what do we need? And trying to figure out if we increase this, or if we decrease this, do we still get what we need? And we may, but you know.
Okay, let me, and I may be talking too much, but let me just say that for instance, when we talk about, and this is going back in history, but when we talk about, you know, $45,000 for Fulcrum Management Solutions, you know, I can see that amount in the spreadsheet. You know, I can see the name of the company and the amount, but I don't, you know, this being a school board member is part-time work. And so, you know, for me it's one of those things that I can like, okay, I'm going to dig right into this. I'm going to contact the CFO. I'm going to contact the superintendent. I'm going to find out all about that because I see this line and I see this amount. Sometimes I will and sometimes I won't. But if that becomes on our agenda, you know, if we're having to vote on Fulcrum Management Solutions, then we're going to have a conversation and we're going to see what this organization is doing, and then I can say, hey, I'm on board. This is fantastic, and I can explain it. If someone comes along and says, how come you paid this company $45,000? I said, this is why we did it. So to me, it's transparency. I'm not trying to do a gotcha at all, but it can be, these services can be a large amount of money if it's under 80,000, and it's not patently obvious. When I look at what Byron puts out, a lot of that stuff, phone bill, I get that, you know, carpentry or plumbing company X or pest control. I mean, I get it, but I don't. When there are things that are there, and as Linda keeps pointing out, doing physical management is one of our 3 tasks. And so, you know, so if my job is to do it with due diligence, then I need a little assistance. And I'm not on the finance committee. I'm not going to sit around and talk about it for 2 hours. And so so anyway, I'll stop.
So can I ask if there's any other comments from people who have not spoken? So I think what I'm hearing is that it could be okay, or we could reduce it. We're not sure what that's going to solve or not. I think Dr. Thomas has offered a $50,000 amount for good reasons and based on research of other districts. I think I would recommend one of 2 moving forwards, reminding you all that we have 20 more of these to talk through. Either we push it up as is and let the public comment on it, and then we make a decision a month from now, or we change it to be $50,000 and move it up for public comment and adjust accordingly and see what the public comment says. I'm okay doing it either way. We could leave it alone and see what the public says, think about it, do a little research. I think if we leave it alone, I would love to spend 6 months looking at these monthly spreadsheets for the expenses between 80 and 50, or between 80 and 25, or whatever we want to think about, and look at them and see how hard it is to track those expenses and see what they are. And then the finance committee can maybe even ask what they're all about to get the details and keep an eye on it. So, I mean, I'm totally fine with that too, if other people are. I don't think this has huge implications right now. And as Dr. Thomas pointed out, let's maybe focus on other things that are more related to the students. Byron added to the chat a total of 10 invoices paid this year between 50,000 and 80,000. So those are things we could look at, keep an eye on.
Yeah, my whole thing, I just appreciate us getting it instead of people in the community filing open record act, and then we're looking like, you know, that's my whole thing. Like, I just want transparency. And I'm kind of feeling like, you know, from some of your comments, you know, that might not be the right thing to voice, but that's our
No.
job.
No, I think transparency is great, and I think we have it right now. But I'm also, I mean, I think we could drop it to 50. I'm be okay with that too. Do we want to have a vote or motion to move it up one way or the other and see what the vote comes out to be?
Move it up the way it is. And
Move it up
let's just see if it gets enough votes.
Well, we
Okay.
can't vote today though, right? I mean, we have to vote next week. So maybe we
Next
just need to separate it off the whole policy list and vote it separately next week, right?
Isn't the decision today on whether or not to make it public? So then how do we
It'll
move-
be.
But we won't really vote on that until next week.
Okay, I see. Okay.
But we would want to make the changes now to whatever we're going to vote on next week, so we don't have this discussion all over again. But I guess what I'm hearing at the moment is most people are okay leaving it alone and letting it, let's see how it goes in the next 6 months with the reports and with looking at the expenses in the range and getting a feeling for it. I mean, we can always revisit it 6 months from now and say, nope, we don't like this. We want to make it 80. I mean, this policy was revised 2 years ago, so it's not one of our crazy out of date policies.
Okay, I would suggest that it be not, because normally you lump these together and we pass them out as one. I would want a separate vote next week.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So leave it alone and vote on it next week. Okay.
And this will be, just to clarify, Dr. Yeager, this will be voting just to put it out for public comment.
Right.
Correct.
But separate from, I mean, because we may get most of these and have one vote or next week to push them out. So this would be one that we would, it's like a consent agenda. We're gonna make this unconsented.
I understand that piece. I guess too, and this will also be with the understanding, regardless of how this moves forward, be it stay the same, not public comments, that it sounds like there is an expectation of a one-page simplified something or another that Mr. Schooneman mentioned.
Any invoice between 10,000 and 80,000.
Okay.
Be provided as a one pager.
Okay.
Well, does it go there or does it go on the other policy where it states that that is to be reported, and that is that policy B something that I sent out today? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it asks
BAB.
for a report. I mean, the report is the report. We can.
And that said it be reported, right? And so Mr. Schooneman offered the report, and so maybe this policy needs to cross-reference BBAB. A lot of the same language is there.
Well, so B is a board policy and D's are the financial policies. But you're right, there can certainly be a cross-reference.
D is board policy. B is board, that was a board policy, the BBAB thing.
Yes. Okay, shall we move on?
I'm ready.
All right, with your permission, I will explain policy IB. This was a revision recommendation, and the revisions are modest, but they are meant to make the policy more aligned to the strategic plan. Basically, that paragraph at the bottom replaces all the lines below and just points to the strategic plan. So rather than going through all the details of some old parts of the policy, we've just aligned it to the strategic plan.
Consent.
Any
Yeah,
questions or
actually-
comments?
I liked this enumeration. I'm sorry. I really did, but I'm fine. I'm not gonna, this isn't a hill I'm gonna die on, but I really like that because it's essentially what the community is saying that we need in terms of making sure that our kids are ready and prepared. So, okay.
Well, this policy was last reviewed in 2004, so I don't know whether it's the same community making those recommendations or not, but I know our strategic plan has changed since 2004. And so this policy makes it, I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead. I'm saying not substantial, and I'm still the same person that was here in 2004. So, okay, it's okay. I'm good with, take it out. Not my hill.
Well, this is not my recommendation. This was Mr. Gaskin's recommendation, so maybe he would like to speak to it if he's still here.
Oh, no, let's not have that discussion. If no one has a question, I'm good. Just keep moving. I'm good.
Okay, IC is a review only, no changes recommended. It's just curriculum development, and it's primarily state law.
Dr. Yeager, it's a revision. Are we on 9.4? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. It should be revised. There was a changing of the wording to cognia, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it stays revised on.
Okay.
I thought you said review. I was just trying to clarify that you said revised.
I should have said revised, yes, but you can't. So you see that there's I don't have my glasses on. I apologize. I left them upstairs. Advanced ed has been dropped and leaving cognia present.
That's great.
I think, yeah. Okay, so that's pretty minor. Any questions or concerns about that one?
Consent.
Okay. ICCR1 curriculum research review. I think it was actually revised very slightly to reference EBCC, but we didn't change it to revise. We just, because that's pretty minor. It was just a cross-reference to another policy. Otherwise, it's as is, no changes. Any questions or comments about that one?
Consent.
Okay, IDAA, this was the CTAE program policy. It was a pretty significant revision. Maybe Mr. Gaskins, you want to describe how we had to fix this to be more aligned with state law and Georgia DOE.
That's exactly right, Dr. Yeager. We revised it to be aligned with the Georgia Department of Education, and we just wanted to include the purpose of CTAE, which is part of the state policy, and that we have a review team that self-assesses the progress of the program every year.
I've just got a question about wording, and this is probably federal law, but it's called career technical and agricultural education in the description code, but then under Carl Perkins, of course, it's vocational and technology education. So and at the beginning of that sentence, it says vocational programming. So I guess we're just kind of adopting the federal language.
There's federal language and then there's state language. So the state language for Georgia is CTAE. And then the federal language talks about where the funding comes from, which is the Carl D. Perkins Vocational and Technology Education Amendment.
And for number 3, where it says the vocational program review, that would be something that's mandated by the feds, I guess.
Yes, so we can continue to receive those federal funds.
Consent.
Good questions. Thank you. Other questions about that one? Okay. So moving to numbers 9.7 IDAC, this was the kindergarten, and also I might mention early childhood education policy that we left alone because it's consistent with current practice.
Consent.
Just 3 sentences. Okay. Number 9.8 IDAF, instruction in U.S. history and government. This one was revised to be aligned with state law. Mr. Gaskins, you want to comment on that one?
That's correct. We added that in 8th grade. It's the study of Georgia history. and the Pledge of Allegiance to the Georgia flag. That's state policy. So we wanted to make sure that we were aligned to state policy.
I've got to ask. I know about the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States. There's a pledge to the Georgia flag.
I'm assuming so, Mr. Davis. I would have to research.
Do you know it, Mr. Gaskins?
I do not. And I'm a history person as well. We just actually went right to the Georgia DOE policy, Mr. Davis. So I'm not as versed on that, but that's what our social studies coordinator recommended to me.
Well, there will be after this new legislation comes out.
It's in the state law. I've never heard of it either.
Well, our kids probably know before we do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, what is if you're making a pledge to Georgia and a pledge to the United States, how does that, I wonder how the two mesh together. But anyway, Mr. Gaskins, we need to, as former social studies teachers, we need to talk about how that intersects.
Well, I just did a quick.
So Greg, yeah, is it just me? Because people are coming in and out here. What's going on here?
I'm sorry, there is a pledge to the Georgia flag that states, I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, and moderation.
It's pretty short, Mr. Gaskins.
So there is one. I didn't hear you though.
Yes, ma'am. There's one. I'm going to drop it in our chat.
Okay, never mind. I'll just Google it.
I just Googled it. It's short.
Well, I never taught it. I'll tell you that much.
Okay, moving forward.
Ms. Gallagher.
Any other questions about this? Moving forward to policy ID BE, which is health education, review only.
Is this something we're doing?
I'm sorry? Health education?
Is this something we actually do?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay,
It's a state requirement. So we were.
Maybe I should just come out and come back in.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else is having problems with their audio. I'm not. Shall we wait for you to drop out and come back? No. All right. Moving forward, unless there's other comments, IDC is the extended programs. This was a review only. We thought the policy was fine. Attorney Hull was also fine with it, but she did ask that we develop as a district a regulation, which we do not currently have, to outline eligibility requirements for these extended programs so that we can be clear on how, if there's equity and how their children are selected. So, but that's to come down the road. The policy itself is fine. Any questions or concerns there? I know Dr. Hull or Attorney Hull's not here.
I have a quick question. Would that address the discussion at our last meeting about the handbook? Certain portions of the handbook, not policies that needed to be reviewed or amended to address equity? I know
This was just about the extended programs and how the children were selected for it. I think the policy book is a different discussion we may need to have down the road.
Dr. Anderson, are you referencing the
high school program of study? Yeah, I think so. I think Attorney Hull, I shouldn't probably speak for her. I think she was okay with it at the moment, but she wants to keep talking about it down the road. But this is a separate issue, I think. This is not just high school, this is all extended programs.
Okay.
Policy IDCA is summer school. Some relatively minor revisions, replacing remedial with a better term called intervention. Adding that we get multiple funding sources, not just a single source for funding summer school, so we don't limit ourselves. And then finally adding meets or exceeds state standards instead of just meeting state standards. So those were, Mr. Gaskins, those were your revisions. Do you want to mention anything about them?
That's correct. We just want to acknowledge that summer school is just not for remediation. And so it's for intervention, enrichment, acceleration. And we have multiple funds. Sometimes schools use LSGT funds for an acceleration or remediation or intervention program, when sometimes they're funded through my office or Dr. Thomas's office.
Great. Yeah, I thought they were good changes. Any other concerns or questions? Okay, moving forward, policy IDDA is a review only, disadvantaged programs consistent with current practice, and so no changes were recommended. Policy IDDC, homebound instructional programs. This was revised to be include language about the Georgia HHB guidelines in a couple of places to update it. Mr. Gaskins, you want to define that?
Yes, this was a cross department collaboration with Dr. Watley's office. So Nurse Amy, as well as our Executive Director of Special Education, recommended these changes just to be in line with our current practices.
Great, thank you. Any concerns or comments? Okay, IDDD is the Gifted Students Program, was revised to basically restate the state law verbatim. So, Mr. Gaskins, do you want to comment on that one? All the other stuff was deleted, I think.
Yeah, we just wanted to be very much aligned to state law. We have a large gifted population, and we wanted to be clear to families how students were eligible for that programming and the process to test students. And so we just copied the state law and rescinded, or our recommendation is to rescind the regulation, because the regulation wasn't always in alignment with the state law.
Okay, great. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, so the reg is going to be rescinded. Anything that was in the reg that needed to be in the policy, it's been moved into the policy, right?
That's correct.
Okay, concerns, Greg?
Yeah, I not concerns, but just, you know, having been a middle school counselor and working, trying to support students being eligible for the gifted program and not having a whole lot of success, I was always under the what I was being led, and this is in a different school district, was that you know, the standardized test that there was one standardized test that had to be given, and that was the mental ability test, which apparently is not true. At least I found out later that that was not true, that's just what that school district elected to do, that you do need to have, my understanding is that you do need to have a standardized test given in one of these four areas, but like it could be in creativity. And I'm trying to read the language to see if my current understanding is correct, or am I just out of sync with the state law?
So I am not the expert on gifted, but there are four areas where a student can be considered eligible. One is around the standardized tests that they take. Another is around activity, and I can't remember the other two offhand, but we are looking at having multiple assessments that students could be deemed eligible for, Mr. Davis. And with that, we have historically looked at national norms, and national norms doesn't throw a wide enough net. So we can also, we're working with the state to look at local norms, and local norms means the norms of that school. So for example, if your top tier is 70% at your school, or 70%, you would not normally be eligible for tag gifted testing, but if that's your local norm, you could be. So we're trying to look at different ways to, thank you, Dr. Yeager, mental ability and motivation are the other two categories. But really the hardest one is that mental ability. And so we're looking at additional assessments so we can help identify more students.
Yeah, when I've been talking to, and again, all this stuff changes all the time, and I know that by following the state legislature, but I was talking to a retired gifted teacher from UGA and found out that there is a standardized creativity test, which I always thought creativity was like, you can't standardize it, you know, because what one person thinks is creative, somebody else says is not creative. But there is a standardized creativity test. And so conceivably a student may not reach the level in terms of what we would call IQ testing or that type of thing, but just blows it out of the water on this standardized creativity test. And so again, I understand that we're getting this from state law. I just want to make sure that since we don't have any regulations along with it, or we're doing away with the regulations, that we are having a very broad interpretation. And I think that's Mr. Gaskins. I think that's what I heard you saying, that you're heading in the direction of having a very broad interpretation. If that interpretation that I just gave you about this because you have to have one standardized test, is what I was told. But it could be in creativity and not IQ.
You can't be in just one alone, Mr. Davis. So you still have to have another score. So you can't just qualify in creativity. Creativity is one of the 4 measures.
Okay.
But you can't just qualify in creativity. We had, and I don't know if Ms. Higginbotham, are you on with us?
She is. And yes, I think, Mr. Davis, I think where the misconception is what has happened is that there's an achievement, mental ability, creativity, and motivation assessment. Right. And you have to be in the 90th percentile of one of those, 3 of those, right, for assessment. Right. What has happened is that we use the achievement as the first screener. And because we use achievement as the first screener, it is screening a lot of students out because it's requiring those students to be in the 90th percentile. So what we are proposing as a district is, instead of using that national norm, which is a 90 percentile norm and above, which is students not represented at all of our schools, we are looking to use local norms. So now we're looking to see who are the top 10% of those students at their school who may not have been identified if we were still using the national norm. And so then when we have those students, then we can test them in the mental ability assessment, the creativity assessment, and then the rubric that teachers use for motivation.
Can I, and this would be the last thing I say, but I'm just suggesting that maybe after all this work is done, that maybe we do need a regulation saying what you're saying, so that it's very clear from your replacement and your replacement's replacement, you know, what we're talking about here. So because it sounds really the kind of thing that we need to be doing in the name of equity. And I just think it needs to be a regulation at some point. That's just my 2 cents.
And I'm sorry, you know, Karen was a former coordinator of gifted. I didn't know if she wanted to add anything to what was mentioned.
That's why I desperately called on her, because she guided us through that work at J.J. Harris.
No worries. Actually, I think you've hit on most of the most important components. Greg, there are two different categories for qualifying. One is 3 out of 4 of the qualifying areas. The second is they must have both mental ability and achievement. And so, as Dr. Thomas noted, but by having the rule of law in this policy, that helps us with ensuring that we're able to qualify the largest number of students. And we are looking for those atypical students in addition to your traditional schoolhouse gifted. And so I think by going with the local norms to help us identify additional students, it gives us it allows us to cast the widest net and identify more students within our community of learners that have strengths and would benefit from the programming.
So I have a question. With this policy, with this change by going to the state reg, are we going to be able to see a measured impact? Or are we going to be tracking? And when does this go into effect? Or are you saying that we're doing it that way now? This policy is just catching up with what we're doing, because we have huge disproportionality now.
So we do have disproportionality, but this policy, we are required to follow the state law. By going with local norms, it allows us to cast a wider net and perhaps eliminate some of that disproportionality.
So even as a charter system, we have to follow the state law on this?
For identification, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Davis, I think if you notice what we're taking out, that part was very brief, abbreviated. It did not inform parents of the process. So unless you were a parent that was contacted because your student had a high achievement test, you did not know about the process based on our own policy for CCSD in the policy or in the regulation. So this just adds a level of transparency about those assessments, what those assessments assess, and how we ensure that students are eligible for gifted services.
So we don't have this articulated. Let me ask the question this way. Do we have this articulated either in our student handbook or on our website someplace?
We have it on our gifted website.
There is a gifted web. I don't think I've been there. Okay, thank you. As a parent, I sought these programs every time I moved my children. So yeah, I'm curious as to what our consistency looks like on that. But thank you very much.
Is it just a section on the actual CCSD website, or is it something different?
It's a section on our website from my landing page.
Okay.
Well, and so now it'll also hopefully be in the policy if somebody Googles gifted in the policies as well.
No, but the process as it stands today is already articulated on our website, is what I'm hearing, right?
You mean the local norms or the state law?
The local norms, whatever we're using today.
I think the local norms is still being developed. Is that right, Mr. Gaskins? We haven't implemented it yet.
We have not implemented that yet. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. All right.
But Greg's suggestion that it become a regulation at some point is not a bad one, I don't think. Just in case, Mr. Gaskins, you fly off to greener pastures.
And I think we definitely want it on the website too. I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
I have a really quick question, and maybe it's getting into, anyway, I'm just gonna ask. So the portfolio piece, maybe Ms. Higginbotham, I'll call you later. The option to put together a portfolio, is that included in here and instead of doing testing, putting together a portfolio? I wanted to know if that was included, and also if how referrals are done, because right now, just with my understanding, parents can do referrals, teachers can do referrals, like pretty much anybody can do referrals. Does that change if we change this policy?
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher, because I was about to say it and then I thought I didn't want to extend the conversation because I started to ask Ms. Higginbotham to speak about the portfolio because Mrs. Davis had asked about us as a charter district, and that was one of the areas that we had requested a waiver for about 10 years ago, and we were able to utilize where students could use a portfolio to replace, I think, is it the motivation score or creativity, Ms. Higginbotham?
They can, a student can qualify with one test score and up to 2 portfolios, and those portfolios can be in achievement, creativity, or motivation.
So that doesn't change.
No, ma'am. It's part of the state rule that you can utilize the portfolio in those spaces. We are one of the districts that was using portfolios early on in its inception.
Could you share with us the link to that gifted website? Because I cannot find it. And it would be helpful to understand how the policies as they're written here translate to what is communicated to parents. So that, I guess that's my main concern with this policy. It's not really a concern, it's just more of a statement that there is no transparency whatsoever in the gifted education program and how students qualify and what the testing looks like. And so if this policy the policy is clearer, and I do appreciate that, but I think the most important aspect is communicating these policies to parents so that they understand it clearly. And I think that that's where the disconnect is.
I just dropped the link to the website in the chat.
So my other question was, how referrals are currently done, does that change, or will it change? Can it change in the future?
So what we are proposing doesn't change the policy. We're not changing the policy. I think we're making the policy clearer because in the part that we are taking out, it refers to the state policy, but there's not a link to the state policy and it doesn't outline specifically the state policy. So what we're doing is just taking out that we have a gifted program, because I think that is known to everyone, and saying these are exactly the things around eligibility for that gifted program. Ms. Gallagher, we do have a process that we're also trying to revise just a little to make it more effective and easier for teachers to do. There's a process where teachers review all of their students for the gifted program through, Karen helped me, in my previous district, we called it the KISS process, but they use the motivation rubric to assess all of their students for motivation, which is a part of the process for eligibility.
I believe they're using the TAP process, which is a part of that Panning for Golden, which they're looking through it and observing all of their students for strengths.
And it's my understanding when you do a when a parent does a referral, there still has to be a recommendation from the school in order for testing to proceed. Is that not right?
So a referral is a referral to the eligibility committee, in which the eligibility committee is required to meet and review all referrals that proceed to evaluation. And so if a parent refers, they're referring to the eligibility committee. If a teacher refers, they're referring to the eligibility committee. A student can actually self-refer or refer a peer, and those would also go to that eligibility committee.
Thank you, Karen. Any other comments or concerns about this one? for now. Move it
So we're
forward.
required by state law to have this?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we required to have this policy?
Yes.
I
Well,
can't
it's-
remember. Okay.
It's in state law. We don't have to put it in our policy because our policy is always second to state law, but it's good to have it in policy so people can see what the process is.
Okay.
Okay, move on. So the last, well, let's see, 9.16, policy IDF, interscholastic activities, again, a very minor revision related to the renaming of advanced ed to Cognia. Otherwise, it's the same. Any concerns or questions about that one? My glasses. Okay. The IED one is the scheduling for instruction. And again, these are pretty minor revisions. I guess it's changing 7 Carnegie units to 8 Carnegie units and adding designate following the superintendent approval. Mr. Gaskins, would you like to tell us more about the Carnegie unit switch and what that means?
So when we went to our block scheduling 4x4, students can take 8 Carnegie units in a year compared to when we were on a traditional schedule in previous years where they took 7.
Okay, so it's due to the block switch.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions about this one? All right, I will move forward to the ones we talked about this afternoon and placed on the agenda. Continuing with I policies. So IG is guidance program, and there's some not huge, but some significant revisions in this policy, appending the word school in front of all references to counseling, changing the name of programs or standards that we now refer to as the American School Counseling Association National Model, revising the goals to include academics, college and career readiness, and social emotional learning, all words that are more common these days than in 2003. And then finally, describing the comprehensive school counseling program instead of a list of all of the individual pieces. So, Mr. Gaskin, would you like to comment?
I think you summarized it well, Dr. Yeager. These were recommendations from our Director of Counseling, Tessa Barbazan, to make it more in line with those ASCA standards, those American School Counseling standards, and then, of course, state law.
Okay. Concerns or questions? All right. Moving forward, policy IGB, student support teams. This was a big revision having to do with basically pasting in relevant law and making deletions according to practice. So I'm going to let you cover this one, Mr. Gaskins.
So that's right, Dr. Yeager. We wanted to define what those student support teams are and who they included. So we really, for parents and our stakeholders, just wanted to identify those individuals that were part of that process, and then really the steps in that process.
Any questions or concerns? I know this one didn't have a lot of your time.
I don't think I saw that one on my list. Okay.
Well, so these last 6 or so are ones that we added after the policy committee, which was at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So if you looked at the previous before today, if you looked at the agenda before today, you might not have seen them. I did send out an email describing them to everybody. But if you need more time, we could pull this one. Or we could pull it out of the consent agenda if you like, so you can have more time to look at it.
I would really like that.
Okay, can you do that, Lisa? Or whoever's driving the bus?
So these are going out for.
So
I'll
these are
make
gonna,
sure
yeah, it can be separated from the big one. Okay.
Okay.
The grading system number 9.20, IHA grading system is very minor, adding designate after approval by the superintendent. Otherwise, we left it alone. The IHAB 921 is also a minor revision, removing the specific number of weeks that had been mentioned for the grading period, and then there was a minor grammatical error that got edited. So there's some deletions in the first line that were, I guess, no longer correct, right? 36 weeks and 15 weeks and different actual weeks for the grading periods, and we turned it into quarters, I think, right? Mr. Gaskins?
Right, that's correct.
So that one's just fixing things that are wrong. Any concerns on that one? I mean, if you want, we can pull all of these from the consent agenda from all the big load of earlier ones, so you can have time to look at them if you like. Would you like to do that?
I don't think it's, I mean, this is just my opinion, but some of them, the changes are so minor that I don't think it's necessary
Okay.
to move all of them off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So far we just pull the grading systems. No, yeah, the student. Which one was it? IGB, student supports. Yeah, that was the one you wanted to look at. Yeah. Okay. All right. Report cards. So 9.21. Nope, that one's what we just did. Sorry. Next one, parent conferences. Okay, so this, unlike the name, it was just a policy that forced us to request or to notify Georgia DOE every time we had student conferences and ate into instructional time. It's no longer necessary because we have this charter system waiver for seat time, and so there's no need anymore to request that request for exemptions. So we don't need this policy anymore. It doesn't talk anything about parent conferences. It just talks about having to notify Georgia DOE. Somewhere we have a policy about parent conferences, don't we? Maybe not. Okay. I'm running out of steam and marbles, so I'm going to try to finish this up before I completely fall on my face. The next one is homework. The original recommendation was to rescind because it's terribly out of date, and but we discussed it in policy committee and we decided to add back one simple sentence stating a general theory of homework being aligned to standards and not more than 10% of the grade, which is a state policy, we think. So we deleted a whole lot of stuff. And then we also deleted the reg that went with it that had incredible detail about homework.
I was gonna ask where the 10% came from, but you just, I think, answered my question.
I think it is, Brandon, you were gonna look at that about state law or something. Did you have any luck with that?
I couldn't find it as state law, but Dr. Anderson, that is our current practice. So when you look at our high school and our middle school grade books, it's not more than 10%.
Any questions or concerns about the homework policies or regulations?
I like it.
Thank you. Okay, the last one is makeup opportunities. This was a minor edit to add or designate behind approval by the superintendent. And all of these changes of adding designate following the superintendent were consistent with Dr. Thomas's requests. I mean, she agrees that these could be decided by people that she designates, I think. Okay, I think that's the end. I think I heard all of them can be lumped together as one vote, except for the first two and number 19. Is that right?
There's one other. Is that
Is
right?
there
Ms.
one?
Palmer?
I have that, yes.
Okay, thank
The
you.
student support team ones that people want to review. Otherwise, we're okay putting them all together as one up or down vote. Speak now or forever hold. I guess you could any time pull them out if you want to change your mind. Right? I won't hold you to the fire here. All right, I think we're done. Shall we be done? God, that took a while. I apologize for that, but this is the majority of the I policies. We're getting there almost. There were like 25 or no, there were like 45 of them, right? Yeah, a bunch of them. Yeah, so we're getting through them slowly. Thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager. Whoops. Thank you, Dr. Yeager. We'll move forward to item number 10. And these are our policies to be adopted, rescinded, or revised. Dr. Yeager, is there any additional information that needs to be added?
I don't believe we've had any public comment on any of these. If Mr. Harris is still here, he could
I am, you're
confirm that.
correct.
But
No
usually
public.
you tell me if we get anything, right? So I don't believe there's been any public comment. So these are as they were approved last month. And again, just looking at them, they were all the K policies, and then the last few K policies, and then some of the J policies that Dr. Watley worked with us on. And then I think the 1L interrogations. Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't get any comments about them, but I guess people are busy. I think they're good. I think they're sound.
We worked hard.
Yeah, you did.
Thanks to Dr. Maddox and Attorney Hull, we worked really hard.
Okay. Are there, so we'll move forward if there are no additional questions or discussions. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Gantt.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager, for the overview and just updating us on those policies that have been out on for public comment. We'll move forward to personnel, which is item 11. 11.1 has the March personnel board report, and then the March 2021 contract list. Dr. Thomas.
Yes, ma'am. So 11.1 is our regular personnel list that includes resignations, retirements, and any hires that have taken place in the last month. And then the contract lists are additions to the contract list that you all received last month for individuals being offered a contract for the 21-22 school year. So it is my recommendation that both of these items be placed on the agenda for approval next week.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions from board members? All right, we'll move forward to item 12, and this is our consent agenda, excuse me, and discussion. And so item 12.1, our minutes from the February 4th work session, is that consent, or does someone want to remove those and vote separately?
Consent.
Okay, all right. 12.2, and these are our board meeting minutes from the 11th.
Consent.
Item 12.3, the purchase of one Freightliner 106 refrigerated box truck.
Consent.
Consent, yeah.
Okay, is that consent? I thought I heard another voice. Okay. Consent. All right, and then item 12.4, the approval of construction manager at risk contract for the board office renovation project at 595 Prince Avenue.
You know, I really didn't get a chance to review this one, so I'd like to do a separate vote.
Okay.
I just have a quick question. I thought we had a contractor that was on retainer, but maybe maybe that's the difference between architect and a construction manager. Is that my confusion?
We don't have a contractor on retainer.
Okay, just a architect.
Well, the architect had a series of projects that they were designing, and this was one of them.
Okay.
Okay. So this one, 12.4 will be pulled off of consent. And I would encourage us, if we have additional follow-up questions after we review, to be sure to reach out to Dr. Thomas.
I was going to offer that, Dr. Gantt, if we have specific questions, because the CM at risk was a little difficult for me to understand. It was out of my zone of expertise. So if there is clarity that the group would like provided by Mr. Gilbert, we can do that.
That would be great.
Okay. We are now at item 13. This is executive session, and executive session for the
We've actually skipped 12.5.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. That's right. We had a amended agenda, and that was our legislative agenda. Mr. Davis, you want to add any additional information or some additional context for us?
You're muted.
We've had a legislative agenda representing from this district. I'm about ready to lose my power. So, but anyway, let me get, are there any questions that people have?
So this is just our district that is advancing this agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
It's down there, love. And the context of this is we've been doing it for, this is our 5th year of having a legislative agenda, and typically we approve it in at the end of the year before the legislative session.
I thought we had one, and that was why I was surprised to see it now, because I thought we did this already earlier, but that's okay.
We do it every year. We tweak it, and
okay.
And so we had to put in new numbers. And one thing that the most significant change that we did is that under the first one, we actually did not have when Mr. Schuleman did the research going back 10 years, the amount of payment that we've received from the state has been fairly consistent. And
okay.
I think if we go back further, I think it would be, I think that local taxpayers have been having to pay more and more of the school budget. But we have one glaring discrepancy, and that's transportation, and that was put in there as an example of something that Dr. Means suggested year before last, of talking about Title I school systems needing additional funding because of the nature of the student body, and the bus transportation is representative of that. So we put that in there for support.
So do we have any bills already pending either in the House or in the Senate on these items?
Well, we've already talked about,
I know we got voucher bills. I know
yeah,
that.
we talked about the SB 47, which flies in the face of both the state GSBA and the and our legislative agenda. Obviously, we've kind of smoothed over the discrepancy in terms of pre-K teachers and parapros, but we had to do so out of local funds because the state still has a serious discrepancy. So, you know, we felt like that was necessary to leave in there. There is some attempt by the part of the state to recognize the fact that new teachers need mentors. But the way that they're trying to address that is, and I think Mr. Gaskins made a very good point, is that they're taking back some of the observations that have to be done on experienced teachers. And they're saying with the savings from that, then we can mentor new teachers. But it's like Mr. Gaskins pointed out, you know, mentoring and evaluation, I mean, those are two different things altogether. And so, you know, you just don't move personnel around and say, okay, well, you're not evaluating as much, so now you can mentor. And we really need, and I think Mr. Gaskins pointed this out, and we strengthened the language in Roman numeral 4, is that we need to train mentors. I mean, just because you're an experienced teacher and just fantastic, you're teacher of the year and you're building, you're just a fantastic teacher, that doesn't automatically assume that you can transfer that skill set to another teacher without training. And so, you know, that's important. There is a bill, and this is the last thing I will say, there is a bill in terms of, and this was actually introduced by a Republican, I forget his name, but he's on the Higher Education Committee of the House, to allow what we would normally call DACA students. I mean, that's the nickname, the students who came over here from another country when they were very, very young and who have been educated throughout their time here in Georgia. But, you know, they can be straight A students, but when it comes to attending college in Georgia in a state institution, they're charged triple the amount. And there is a bill, I don't know if it's going to pass out of committee, but there is a bill to rectify that. And so, you know, that's something to watch, and it's something that GSBA, thanks to our efforts, is part of their legislative agenda, and therefore they're reporting about that bill. So there have been things that you've gotten from GSBA about that particular bill.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any additional questions or discussion?
I would like to pull this myself, just so that if there are any additional questions, because I won't go into great length if there's no questions next week, but I do think it's important that the public know. I would like to cover all 6 areas in a minute and a half next week, unless there are questions.
So on this document, could you also go ahead and cross-reference any pending bills or pending legislation?
I'd be glad to.
That would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And so, Mr. Davis, if I hear you're saying, well, you want to pull it from consent and you're going to cover it in a minute and a half next week or less.
Right. But then I'm going to add another 30 seconds in attachment. Do what Linda asked me to do. And I'm going to talk really fast and you won't even understand what I'm saying.
Okay, oh yeah, all board members hear that, right? And all, Dr. Thomas and
Ms.
Time
Palmer,
off at a
put it
minute
in the
and a
minute.
half.
we're gonna put the
Minute.
timer up.
It's in the minute.
And definitely, if you have questions, please reach out to Mr. Davis, or, discussion. Please reach out to him, so that those questions, or you can share your opinions about that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Davis. We are at item 13, and this is executive session. And it's executive session, 13.1, in accordance with OCGA 50.14.3. And it is for the purpose, the property committee will convene into executive session for the purpose of discussion and deliberating negotiations to purchase, dispose of, or lease a property. And so I'm going to open the floor for a motion to enter into executive session for that stated reason.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that was a motion by Dr. Yeager, second by Mr. Davis. Any questions about this? Further discussion? Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for all of those who are, who approve, I'm sorry, I was getting ready to say who are interested in, who approve entering into executive session. I do want to just make a quick note before you take roll. Please wait a few minutes until Ms. Palmer lets us know that the session is no longer being broadcast, since we will be in executive session. Dr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Gantt?
Yes.
Attorney Hull? And Dr. Maddox?
Yes.
Okay, we are, that motion carries to enter into executive session at 9:40.